Simon & Schuster Audio presents Star Trek IX, Insurrection by J.M. Dillard. Read by Boyd Gaines.
The morning of what would become the Day of Lightning began like all other spring days, cool first, then warmed by the rising sun. Anij paused in her walking to gaze up at the mountains, stark and serene against a cloudless sky. They were as timeless as the sunlight, warm upon her homespun-clad shoulders. She had walked this particular path into town every day for the past, how many mornings? Always, she told herself. Forever. Forever the Baku had lived here. Forever they had enjoyed the wealth of the fertile valley. Even when the rains came, they were gentle, perfect. And every morning the intense beauty of her world startled her afresh and filled her with joy. On a nearby farm, a group of children were clearly on the prowl for something hidden. Two of the boys were scanning the hay-strewn troughs. Anij's faint smile turned to a wide grin as small shoulders, elbows, knees, and finally an entire body erupted from the haystack in a flurry of airborne straw. This was her youngest friend, the 12-year-old Artem. His mother, Burrell, had been a dear friend too, and upon her tragic early passing, Anij came to serve as a foster aunt. Artem scrambled past the reach of his pursuers and up the trail that led into the rocky foothills, while Anij continued her journey into the village. And there, Sojef, Artem's father, would be waiting, always and forever, with a question in his eyes, and Anij with the same answer in hers. Not yet. Not yet. She had always thought her answer was based on purely solid reasoning, that she was still young, and Sojef too, that there was still time for such commitments for children. True, he was a good man, leader of the entire Baku community, 600 now, and growing slowly again after so many were lost during the time of sorrows. She knew, also from the now departed Burrell, that Sojef had been the most devoted of husbands, the gentlest of lovers. A year after Burrell's death, on his son's first birthday, Sojef had professed his love to Anij, had asked her to commit to a permanent partnership. Forever, he had said. Forever, Anij knew, was a very, very long time. Even so, she did not say no. At the same time, she did not say yes. I don't know. Give me time, Sojef, give me time. Time to accept that she would wed not out of passion, but friendship. Sojef had given her time, of course. He was Baku, too mature and intelligent to let something as foolish as his emotions cloud his judgment. And so he and Artem remained her friends, visiting daily. It was understood in the village that perhaps someday they would announce a formal commitment. Anij drank in a long breath of cool morning air as she rounded a sharp curve in the path. The mountain that had blocked her view gave way suddenly to reveal the village square, encircled by the blooms of spring in dazzling shades of yellow, fuchsia, blue-violet. No matter how many times she saw that particular view, she always experienced pleasure. How many springs had she experienced? Many, so many. And while she had always been aesthetically moved by the season's heady beauty, she had always reacted with wisdom and restraint. Only the youngest, most spoiled children indulged their emotions freely. This spring was different. Or perhaps it was she, Anij, who had somehow changed, grown tired of denying her feelings in favor of responsibility. The night before, she had dreamed a foolish dream, that she was free of all commitments, that she flew like a bird from the village and found her heart's desire in an offlander, a stranger whose face she could not clearly see, but whose strong arms held her firmly, whose whisper evoked in her an intensity of physical craving and emotion she had never before experienced. She had wakened with a cry of disappointment at finding herself in her own bed alone. Even now, gazing upon the village nestled against the mountain sky and quicksilver river, she felt a pang of yearning. It followed her across the wildflower-filled meadow, past the pond into the village square, as she reasoned with it silently. "You are a fool, Anise, to think such thoughts. You know how craven, how immoral offlanders are. How could you even dream of loving one, even dream of giving up this?" And the beauty and serenity of the valley soothed her as it always did. By the time she greeted her first fellow villager, her smile was once again genuine. This was the place she belonged, had always belonged, and the joy of being here far outweighed any childish cravings for true passion. People had begun milling into the square. Some of the first merchants to arrive had already set up their stalls in the shade of a large rock face where the mountain met the village, and were displaying wares, homespun clothing, honey, medicinal herbs. And there, beside a market stall, stood Sojeth, dressed in plain homespun. Anise greeted him as she had every day for the past 11 years since his proposal, with a slight, knowing smile. She turned from him and headed for a produce stall. The vendor sliced a dripping square of flesh off the season's first majra fruit and passed it to Anise, who took a grateful bite and winced with pleasure at the tartness, a sudden shudder passing through her. Within the rock face, behind the shields that rendered him invisible, Galatan watched as the Baku woman shuddered, then lifted her head and stared right at him. He gazed down at his monitor to assure himself that the shields were in perfect working order, and of course she could no more see him than she could see the uniformed Starfleet officer sitting beside Galatan at the console, or the other researchers hidden in the blind, or, for that matter, the other isolation-suited researchers milling around the village square, rendered invisible by the force field that appeared to Galatan as a bright red glow. She was, like all Baku, handsome, particularly so with her sun-bleached, close-cropped curls that framed delicate features, and those damnably ageless eyes. All the Baku had them, even the children, and for the umpteenth time that hour, Galatan found himself struggling to master his hatred and envy. Look at her, so casually wiping away the scarlet juice of the majra fruit from her chin, with that soft, unmarked skin. Galatan drew in a silent breath at its perfection. How radiant it was, how firm and unlined, while he and all his fellow Sona were old, irretrievably old and bound soon for death, their genes so damaged that there was no hope of progeny, of sons and daughters to remind their parents of the beauty of youth. Many of the Sona had already died. With none to replace them, they were an aged and dying race, destined for extinction within a decade, perhaps two. The mere sight of the Baku offended him and filled him with longing. Galatan paused to look at the Starfleet lieutenant beside him, a middle-aged human female with wrinkles beginning to appear. Any respectable Sona would have taken prompt action to have them removed, yet humans and most other Federation races tolerated wrinkling gracefully. Galatan's own facial skin was pulled taut, like a rotten melon about to split. Between the daily facial surgeries and the genetic damage, he was just beginning to develop the chronic algal growth all Sona dreaded, for it caused an unsightly dark green mottling just beneath the skin. Over time, it disintegrated layers of delicate tissue from the inside out. The sense of another warm body standing beside him drew his attention back to the present. Another Starfleet officer, this one an ensign, proffered a computer pad. Gallatin took the pad and glanced cursorily at the readings, then at the ensign, a young human male of Caucasian variety with skin an astounding fresh-scrubbed pink. How did the Sona appear to him? Grotesque and decadent, most likely, with stretched, bloodless skin and sumptuous, ornate robes augmented by precious jewels. Not that Gallatin considered his own dress excessive. It was not the Sona's fault that the entire known galaxy lacked any sense of style, or that Starfleet's designers adored the drab and unimaginative. A little gold-pressed latinum and onyx at the collar and shoulders, perhaps a large central ruby on the utility belt, just a few subtle changes here and there. Gallatin nodded to himself. Decadent. That is what they think we are. Decadent, decrepit, and dying. And at the sight of the ensign, and of the vibrant, unadorned beauty of the Baku woman, he knew they were right. He thrust the pad back at the ensign.
Admiral Dougherty is waiting for this. Transmit it to the ship.
Alert! Area 12!
Gallatin watched as the Baku and their invisible observers turned toward the hills in astonishment.
Sir, the android has entered.
Gallatin lunged to the nearest comm panel.
Report!
We can't bring him down. He's a...
Next to Gallatin, the pink-skinned ensign pointed, following the gaze of the startled Baku to the nearby foothills. Invisible to the villagers, a figure in a glowing isolation suit was running down the rock-strewn hills. Gallatin stepped toward the main view screen.
Magnify!
The image bloomed abruptly, enlarging to reveal the foothills with such detail that Gallatin might have been there beside the fleeing figure as it scrambled down the steep hillside toward the village, preceded and followed by a small avalanche of stones and sand and dust. Two other glowing figures, Sona from their posture and movements, armed with plasma weapons, gave chase. Alongside them ran a group of Baku children, clearly terrified by the blast and entirely unaware that their path kept them in the midst of the invisible runners. Gallatin realized that something horrible had happened, something that threatened the entire mission here. Gallatin knew that the first runner was Starfleet, and those following, Sona. One of the Sona guards lifted his plasma weapon and took aim at the fleeing figure. On one of the comm panels that still showed the village square, the curly-haired Baku woman was indignant.
What is it? What's happening?
Gallatin remembered suddenly. Your name is Anij, and of them all you are the most fearless. Gallatin's worst fears had come true. A Starfleet intruder had made an unfortunate discovery. But if he permitted his people to kill a Starfleet officer here in front of all these Starfleet scientists... He shouted at the comm to the Sona guards.
Hold your fire!
With a single look, he conveyed an order to the Starfleet lieutenant seated beside him. She knew immediately what he meant and touched a control.
Base to Commander Data. Rerouting. Microhydraulic. Power distribution. Regulating. Thermal overload.
On the view screen, the android ran, staggering toward the village square. Gallatin realized perhaps there was a way out after all, to destroy him gracefully without insulting Starfleet. The Starfleet lieutenant spoke again.
Data, report to base immediately. Transferring positronic matrix functions. Engaging secondary protocols.
As he ran, he lifted both gloved hands toward the neck of his helmet. The Starfleet ensign who had handed Gallatin the pad cried out in horror.
He's trying to remove the headpiece.
Gallatin tapped his own comm panel.
All field units, intercept the android.
The boy Artin ran gasping through the village in search of his father Sojeff. At last he found him directing others away from the approaching disturbance. There were no answers to be found in Sojeff's expression. There was panic in the way he roughly grabbed Artem and held him tightly. He directed his people toward the meeting hall. Get inside. Find shelter. From behind them, it was as if someone had just plummeted into the pond. Artem wriggled in his father's grasp and broke free, turning to witness the most impossible sight of all. The floating head and neck of a man barely more than an arm's length away. But not a man, at least not Baku. His skin was pale, shimmering gold, except for a deep, ugly wound across his neck. His eyes were bright, and they stared directly at Artem. Ah! The boy leaped backwards, falling to the ground even as he struggled to turn and flee. His father seized his arm and pulled him away just as the ghost's head spoke. Secondary protocols active. The head grimaced, as if fighting off invisible enemies. There was a flash of red, then the abrupt appearance of another man suspended in the air beside the golden head. This second one was also clearly an offlander, but his tight, mask-like face was mottled with ugly green sores. In the middle of the square, these two ghosts battled hand to hand. Artem watched as the mottled man rose into the air, then plummeted down headfirst to the ground. The first offlander parted the air as if it had been a cloak wrapped about him and stepped forth from it. In one swift, smooth move, he took the lightning weapon from the unconscious man's hands. The golden man turned the weapon toward the bare rock face and fired. Something within the stone itself sputtered. The rock face shimmered as if made of moonbeams, then faded away to reveal a sight more impossible than any other Artem had yet seen. In place of the rock was a small building sculpted from the stone, the front of which was entirely glass. And in the building were low black tables on which sat strange metal devices. Hiding behind them were people, most of whom had apparently ducked for cover. As Artem and the rest of the astounded Baku watched, those people rose slowly, sheepishly to their feet. Another mottled one, apparently a leader, was dressed in garish purple and green robes, bejeweled with glittering gems and gold. Beside him stood a brown-skinned woman in a jumpsuit. Artem turned to see more offlanders there. As for the golden ghost, he lowered his weapon and surveyed the results of his attack. The expression on his bland features was one of simple satisfaction. In the captain's quarters aboard the USS Enterprise, Picard let go a sigh of disgust as his 10th attempt to fasten the high, tight-fitting collar of his dress uniform failed. Immediately, Beverly Crusher turned toward him, caught both sides of the recalcitrant collar with her thumbs, and gave it a yank that forced even more air out of the captain's lungs. Beside them, Troy paused to glance up from her pad, but wisely chose not to smile. Beverly suddenly clicked her tongue in disgust.
You either need a new uniform or a new neck.
Meanwhile, Troy continued the briefing.
The people are known as the Evora. Population 300 million.
Dapper in formal dress with a freshly trimmed beard, Will Riker entered the room.
Our guests have arrived and are eating the floral arrangements on the banquet tables.
Dismayed, Troy scanned her pad for information.
Oh my God. Are they vegetarians? That's not in here.
Bridge to Captain Picard.
Picard immediately recognized the voice as that of Kel Perham, a brilliant young Trill recently assigned to the Enterprise.
Yes, Ensign.
Command wants to know our ETA at the Goran system.
Picard frowned faintly at Riker. Command had been dumping missions on them fast and furious lately. This was just one more thing the captain hadn't had time to be briefed on yet.
The Goran system?
Riker showed no outward sign of frustration, but Picard sensed it all the same.
Captain, they need us to mediate some territorial dispute.
Picard sighed.
So they need us to put out one more brush fire. Anyone remember when we used to be explorers?
No one answered. In silence, they all filed onto a turbolift. Another voice filtered through Picard's communicator.
LaForge to Picard. Captain, I need to talk to you before the reception.
As Picard drew a breath to reply, the turbolift doors parted at the back entrance to the reception area. Picard suddenly found himself face to face with Commander Worf. Last Picard had heard, Worf still served on Deep Space Nine.
Worf, what the hell are you doing here?
The Klingon's stern expression lightened ever so slightly.
I was at the Manzar colony installing a new defense perimeter when I heard the Enterprise was in this sector. Mr. Worf, I have a few ideas I'd like to discuss about Manzar security.
The Klingon nodded and excused himself. As Picard entered the banquet area, the crowd of Starfleet officers moved aside to give the captain's party access to the small Evora delegation. Picard's diplomatic smile faltered. There had been nothing in Troy's briefing to suggest that the Evora were not within physical parameters suited to a humanoid-fitted ship. The top of Regent Cusar's head, adornments included, barely came to the captain's waist. Troy recovered smoothly and with perfect graciousness bowed to the delegation.
Regent Cusar, it is my honor to present to you the captain of the Enterprise, Jean-Luc Picard.
If Cusar felt any discomfort due to her diminutive size, she hid it well. Geordi LaForge walked over to the captain and interrupted.
Excuse me, sir. Admiral Doherty's aboard a Sona ship in Sector 441. He's requesting Data's schematics.
Picard sensed something wrong.
Data should have been back by now. They were only scheduled to observe the Baku village for a week. Set up a secured comm link to the Admiral in the anteroom.
LaForge moved off to comply. Dougherty's call may have caused Picard concern, but at least it provided rescue from polite conversation. Before the screen of the console, Picard and Geordi LaForge listened to Admiral Dougherty.
He's not acknowledging any Starfleet protocols, not responding to any of our hails.
Matthew Dougherty was aged 69, silver-haired, lean, tanned. Conversation with him was always a delight, until last year when his wife Madeline had passed away. Picard recalled that Dougherty had taken her death hard. He seemed recovered now, but sorrow had definitely aged him. They spoke of Data, who, according to Sona witnesses, had gone berserk and started firing at shielded cultural observers. Picard asked of Dougherty.
You have no idea what precipitated his behavior?
Dougherty shook his head.
And now he's holding our people hostage down there.
If what Dougherty was saying were true, then surely Data had suffered some sort of physical trauma.
The Enterprise can be at your position in 2 days, Admiral.
That's not a good idea, Captain. Your ship hasn't been fitted for this region. There are environmental concerns. They're calling this whole area the Briar Patch. Just get me Data's schematics. I'll keep you informed. Dougherty out.
Picard turned from the screen to LaForge.
His emotion chip?
The engineer shook his head.
Didn't take it with him.
Picard paused.
Send the Admiral Data's schematics.
LaForge nodded. Picard knew there was no time to head for the Briar Patch, of course, but it was time to prioritize, and he knew with illogical certainty that whatever was happening in the Briar Patch with the Baku mission and to Data took precedence over all. Picard looked over his shoulder and called to a young Bajoran male to enter.
Report to the galley and tell the chef to skip the fish course.
Picard turned back to LaForge.
I want our guests to depart as quickly as etiquette allows. I'll ask Worf to delay his return to Deep Space Nine so he can join us. We're going to stop by Sector 441 on our way to the Goran system.
LaForge caught on immediately and flashed a small but brilliant smile before leaving. In the body enhancement facility aboard the sonar ship, Matthew Dougherty struggled to hide his disgust at Starfleet's new allies. The room smacked of an old 19th century Earth bordello brothel cum sickbay, with reclining sonar figures receiving transfusions of reportedly rejuvenating chemicals. It even had scantily clad women, clearly there as slaves and sex objects. He reminded himself that while he personally did not agree with the sonar that abject hedonism was a virtue, he was still bound to treat them civilly. Beside him, Ruafo, the sonar commander titled the Adar, lay back languidly and enjoyed the skilled attentions of a pair of female estheticians. Of all the sonar, Ruafo disgusted him most of all. Had Ruafo had his way, the sonar would simply have gone in with their plasma weapons and rounded up the Baku without the slightest consideration of the respect due sentient beings. At the moment, Ruafo was annoyed with the Admiral.
I should never have let you talk me into the duck blind in the first place. Your Federation procedures have made this mission 10 times as difficult as it needed to be.
Our procedures were in place to protect the planet's population from unnecessary risk.
The sonar scoffed.
600 people. You want to avoid unnecessary risks? Next time, leave your android home.
Dougherty bit his tongue to avoid answering sharply. Ruafo's group was even smaller than the Baku's, insignificant and unremarkable save for their reputation as petty criminals. Starfleet was dealing with them only because they now possessed a technology the Federation lacked.
Bridge to Adar, Ruafo. We're approaching the planet.
With a disinterested, jaded air, Ruafo signaled for the cosmeticians to finish, then pressed his comlink.
Take us into high orbit.
He rose, then turned to Dougherty, shifting from anger to hospitality as he proffered his now vacant chair.
Lie down, Admiral. The girls will take 20 years off your face.
Another time, Adar.
Your self-restraint puzzles me, Admiral. You continue to deny yourself every benefit this mission has to offer.
The deck beneath their feet suddenly shuddered. Dougherty had served his years as a captain and had not forgotten the sound and feel of a phaser blast. Ruafo glanced knowingly at Dougherty and was out the door and on the lift without a word. The instant Dougherty followed Ruafo onto the sonar bridge with its latinum-plated consoles and the Adar's fur-lined chair, the flashing purple alert lights hurt his eyes. On the main screen, the ringed planet of the Baku rotated lazily, half obscured by phenomena common to the briar patch, rose-colored plasma tendrils, and translucent mother-of-pearl gas clouds. Ruafo took his chair.
Report.
The entire bridge crew were either Tarlac or Eloran, save for 2 Sona officers, 1 male and 1 female. The male Sona, apparently Ruafo's number 1, replied quickly.
Phaser blast. Unknown origin.
Raise shields. Take us out of orbit.
Dougherty knew that Ruafo was concerned about taking another hit. While the vessel's shields could probably afford another phaser blast, the dying race's technology was second to none. Every Sona Dougherty had ever met avoided even minor physical injury to an extreme degree. Indeed, the language had no word for death. It was referred to by euphemism only, and then in whispers, briefly, as if it were the most heinous crime. Before the death of his wife Madeline, Dougherty, in his naive arrogance, would have thought them unnaturally phobic. Now he understood, and would do almost anything to help others avoid the same cruel pain. A Tarlac officer looked up from his console.
Photon torpedoes. Brace for impact.
The ship reeled. Dougherty held on, slipping only once to his knees. A quick glance at Ruafo showed the sonar in the grip of both terror and fury as he clutched the arms of his command chair. It occurred to Dougherty that he might actually die here now. He was not naive enough to believe that he would join Madeline in some distant nebulous paradise. Nevertheless, dying now did not seem a bad thing. He was tired of loneliness, of grief. Abruptly, the blows ceased.
The vessel has broken off pursuit, sir.
A female Eloran stood, her face ghostly behind wisps of smoke.
Visual contact.
Dougherty caught sight of the ship as it sailed free of a semi-transparent gas cloud.
That's our ship.
The small Federation scout ship turned and sailed back toward the Baku planet surface. Although its pilot could not be seen from the sonar vessel, Dougherty had no doubt as to his identity. The android, Commander Data. On the Enterprise bridge, the view screen showed the Briar Patch glowing with the incandescence of 1,000 Terran sunsets. Glittering serpentine coils of plasma snaked languidly through pearlescent clouds of gas, dust, and rubble, the legacy of long-dead stars. At the same time that Picard appreciated its beauty, he cursed its treachery. Once within its grasp, the Enterprise would be hobbled, cut off from all outside contact. As Picard stepped off the lift with Riker at his side, he noted with a sense of nostalgia the presence of Worf at Tactical. Troy and LaForge were waiting at their respective stations of command and ops. The new Trill ensign, Kel Perham, sat at Con. LaForge turned from his post.
We're about to lose communications with Starfleet, Captain.
Picard acknowledged him with a look. Then, accompanied by Riker, he moved over to the command station and addressed the seated Counselor Troy.
Do you have everything you need from command?
Troy nodded.
We've downloaded all the files on the duck-blind mission and the sonar.
Picard drew Riker into the conversation.
You have 2 days to become experts.
Picard turned toward Worf.
Mr. Worf, our job will be to find a plan to safely capture Data.
In response, the Klingon held up a tricorder.
I've already had Commander LaForge modify a tricorder with one of Data's actuation servos. Its operational range is only 4 meters, but it will shut him down.
Picard smiled.
It's good to have you back, Worf.
He turned to Perham.
Slow to 1/3. Take us into the Briar Patch.
It was in the Enterprise library that Will Riker began to feel the first effects. He and Deanna Troi were sitting at parallel stations in an area where several other silent researchers were working. Deanna was briefing him on her discoveries, and for the first time in years, Riker was suddenly intoxicated by the scent of gardenias. What was she saying? Something about the sonar discovering the Baku planet 6 months ago.
Turned out it's in Federation space, so they came to us to get approval for a sociological study. The Federation Council suggested it be a joint mission.
Riker managed to shake off the effect of the perfume.
Why was Data assigned?
Environmental concerns. An android could be safely exposed to the elements during the installation of a duck blind.
Riker huddled closer to her. I don't see anything to suggest the Sona have any interest in sociology.
What are they interested in?
He grinned at his monitor. Wine, women, and song. Deanna sniffed primly.
You should feel right at home with them.
Riker read from his own screen. Collectors of precious metals, jewels. Deanna purred teasingly.
I should feel right at home with them.
You're in luck, Deanna. They use alien women as indentured servants. A half-century ago, they conquered 2 primitive races, the Tarlac and the Allura, and then integrated them into their culture as a labor class. He inclined his head toward his monitor. Look at this. The Sona ships are rumored to be equipped with isolytic subspace weapons outlawed by the Second Khitomer Accord. He continued to scan the information, but could not ignore, did not want to ignore, the delicious, goose-flesh-inducing way Deanna began to play with the hair at the nape of his neck. Something on the monitor caught his eye. It says here that some form of genetic anomaly has prevented the Sona from procreating. If that's true, they're a dying race. When he and Deanna had finished their mission there, he was in a panic to head for the safety of the bridge, before he forgot he was on duty and swept her off to his quarters. In the secure darkness of his Enterprise guest quarters, Worf dreamed he wrestled a young male koala beast. The Klingon lay spread-eagled atop its muscular bulk, his knees digging into the tender spots that disabled its legs, his hands clutching its arms, his teeth pulling, ripping through the rock-hard muscle of its neck, searching for the one delicate area. At last he found it, an eye-sized soft spot of downy flesh. He bit into it, and blood, hot, bitter, salty, spurted against the roof of his mouth, onto his tongue, down his throat. He howled, intoxicated, and drank. When he had had his fill, his mouth and face dripping with the Kolar's wine-colored blood, he crawled off the beast and was suddenly overwhelmed with desire. He looked up at the sound of laughter, not mocking or amused, but victorious, and saw before him the long-dead Kalar, the mother of his son, now resurrected. How young she seemed, how strong and fiercely beautiful, how Klingon. She stood, arms akimbo, grinning slyly, and at the realization that she was seen, she laughed again and tossed her hair, as if daring him.
So, I die, and all you can do is take up with measly, pale-skinned excuses for females. Betazoid, Trill. Do you remember what it is to love a real woman, a Klingon? Touch me gently, kiss me tenderly, and I'll tear your arms from their sockets.
He reached for her.
Bridge to Commander Worf.
The realization that he had overslept pierced the veil of Worf's unconsciousness. Had Picard actually called him from the bridge?
Worf, I don't know how they do it on Deep Space Nine, but on the Enterprise we still report for duty on time.
In reply, Worf rose swiftly in the darkness. His unthinkable sin of oversleeping troubled him, as did the inebriating surge of adrenaline and passion at the memory of the Kolar's blood in his mouth. He felt like a youth in the throes of adolescence. What was in the air aboard the Enterprise that he should feel so? On the bridge, meanwhile, Picard had already arrived at his own explanation. It was the mission to save Data and the clear sense of purpose that filled him with exceptional energy that morning. Lieutenant Daniels interrupted Picard's thoughts.
Sir, the sonar ship with Admiral Doherty aboard has entered tracking range. Try to hail them, Lieutenant.
Daniels complied as the bridge doors opened and a sheepish Worf entered, settling into the station as Daniels exited the bridge. Picard gave Worf a pointed sideways glance.
On screen.
Picard had been prepared, of course, by Riker and Troy's briefing on the Sonar's appearance and culture, as well as their less-than-ethical involvement with the drug and slave trade. The Sonar sitting next to Dougherty would be Ruafo, the Sonar commander, or Adar. He was around Dougherty's age. The skin of his face was pulled taut over the bone structure, giving him the appearance of a slightly startled skeleton. A large scar where the skin had apparently torn many times marred his forehead. Ruafo's eyes were old, mistrustful. As for Matthew Dougherty, he appeared ill at ease. His manner was far from cordial.
Captain, I wasn't expecting you.
Displeased the Admiral might be, but Picard knew him to be reasonable. Dougherty sighed deeply.
Captain, I wish I had better news. Commander Data attacked us in the mission scout ship yesterday. Ruafo and I have decided to send in an assault team.
Sir, Commander Worf and I have been working on several tactical plans.
The Sona lunged forward in his latinum-plated chair with the fury of a coiled serpent.
Your android has turned dangerously violent, Captain. He must be destroyed.
Picard gave the Sona a steely look.
If our first attempt to capture Data fails, I will terminate him. I should be the one to do it. I'm his captain. And his friend.
Picard watched as Dougherty wavered, then made his decision.
All right, Captain, you have 12 hours to retrieve your android and no more. Then I want you out of the Briar Patch. In the meantime, we'll be heading out to the perimeter to call for sonar reinforcements in case you fail. Remember, retrieve Data, then get out. Good luck. Dougherty out.
The Admiral's image vanished abruptly, leaving Picard to wonder, what agreement did Starfleet, or Dougherty himself, have with the Sona that neither wanted the Enterprise to discover? And why were both worried about anyone else having contact with the planet? On the shuttlecraft view screen, the marbled blue Baku planet rotated lazily inside its gleaming rings. Beside Picard in the co-pilot's chair, Worf squinted at his readouts.
Sensors are not picking up any ships coming from the surface. Mr. Worf, transmit a wideband covariant signal. That'll get his attention.
Suddenly, the small craft pitched leeward. Picard worked the controls, and the shuttle climbed sharply, evading another phaser blast which lit up the view screen.
Mr. Worf, open all frequencies. Data, this is Captain Picard. Please acknowledge.
On the sensors, a Federation scout vessel appeared, firing continuously as it slipped free from a gas cloud. Picard maneuvered wildly, too erratically for a logical android mind to predict. In the midst of it, Worf, looking somewhat green, interrupted.
Sir, if we force a tachyon burst, it may force him to reset his shield harmonics. When he does, we could beam him out. Make it so, Mr. Worf.
The Klingon worked a few controls at tactical.
Direct hit. He's resetting his shield harmonics.
Picard turned toward the small transporter pad. The transport was unsuccessful. Worf frowned at his panel.
He's activated a transport inhibitor.
Picard pulled yet another evasive maneuver.
He can fly a ship. He anticipates tactical strategies. His brain is obviously functioning. We've seen how he responds to threats. I wonder how he'd respond to...
He turned excitedly to the Klingon.
Do you know Gilbert and Sullivan?
Worf blinked.
No, sir. I haven't had a chance to meet all the new crew members. They're composers, Worf, from the 19th century. Data was rehearsing a part in HMS Pinafore before he left. A British star is a soaring soul, as free as
and over the comlink,
mountain
much to the captain's gratification, another voice joined in, Data's. Together he and Picard finished the chorus, and from the comm, Data continued singing. The captain grinned and told Worf,
Prepare the docking clamps.
The shuttle glided beneath the scout. The Klingon rose and moved swiftly to the docking hatch. In the instant that Worf blew open the scout's hatch, he adjusted his modified tricorder to Data's actuation frequency, just in time to see Data turn from the scout's control panel to blankly regard his intruder. Then Data lunged with a feline ferocity and grace. Worf extended the tricorder toward the android and again pressed the control. Data sailed toward him, and in midair the android's amber eyes went abruptly dull. His body froze immobile and dropped to the floor. With a sigh of relief, Worf touched his comm badge.
Captain, Commander Data is safely in custody.
Retrieve data, then get out, Dougherty had said. But the Admiral had not specifically forbidden Picard to go to the planet's surface, and Picard was determined to test the limits of Dougherty's patience. According to the Enterprise's sensor readings, the entire Starfleet mission group remained down on the planet's surface along with a handful of Sona. But if there were any real danger to them, the Admiral would certainly have beamed them up. The agrarian Baku wielded no transporter beam inhibitors, no shields, nothing whatsoever that could prevent such a move. And Sona vessels were supposedly technological marvels, with the capacity to beam up the mission team en masse, with no one left behind to suffer the wrath of their captors. Even now, Riker had reported, all on the planet's surface appeared peaceful. And if the delicate negotiations Dougherty had mentioned were in fact occurring, both parties must have reached an impasse. No communications had taken place between the planet's surface and the Sona vessel for the past hour. Whitewash, Picard decided. Everything Matthew Dougherty had told him thus far had been whitewash, a pleasant exterior that hid something rotten, rather like the thick layer of cosmetics worn by the aged Sona. The Admiral had been far too nice when Picard had shown up unannounced in the Briar Patch. If there had been real environmental concerns, the Dougherty Picard knew would have chewed him up and spit him out, and noted it all on the captain's record. The real Dougherty would have beamed up his people the instant the Baku discovered the duck blind. Something was seriously amiss. So it was that Picard, accompanied by an entourage of armed engineers, entered the Baku village on foot. Crusher and Troy flanked him, and the three, like the engineers, kept their phasers drawn. It was difficult, if not impossible, to keep a somber, even threatening expression on one's face. The air was fresh, rich with oxygen, the distant mountains lavender gray beside a silver river, and the bird song. In the shade, the Baku sat at handmade wooden tables, apparently enjoying a leisurely lunch. Among them sat their alleged hostages, still dressed in Starfleet uniforms, but definitely off-duty given the amount of laughter in the air. A small group of Sona sat off to one side, apparently uninterested in either eating or socializing. The Baku looked as perplexed as Picard felt. The hostages looked frankly disappointed. At once the heads of the mission rose and moved toward Picard, one Sona, one Starfleet. "Captain, Subadar Gallatin, Sona Command." He was Adar Ruafo's second-in-command, but he lacked his Adar's arrogance and flamboyance in dress. The Starfleet officer introduced himself. "Lieutenant Curtis, attaché to Admiral Dougherty." Picard kept his weapon trained on the nearest tableful of quizzical Baku. "Are you all right?" Smiling, Lieutenant Curtis gestured at the natives. "We've been treated extremely well by these people." Deanna Troi glanced sideways at the captain. "They have an incredible clarity of perception, Captain. I've never encountered a species with such mental discipline." As she spoke, a small group of Baku made its way toward them. Picard judged them to be leaders, although none of them appeared to be older than 40. The tallest, a male, walked up to Picard and faced him with a direct, open expression and an air of friendliness. "My name is Sojeff, Captain." "Jean-Luc Picard. My officers, Dr. Crusher and Counselor Troy." Sojeff favored them each with a look, then half-turned toward the waiting feast. "Would you like something to eat?" "No. We're here to rescue them." "As you wish, but I would ask you to disarm yourselves. This village is a sanctuary of life." Picard holstered his weapon and heard the rest of his away team do the same. He turned back to Sojeff with a wry smile. "We were under the impression they were being held against their will." A petite, small-boned woman beside Sojeff took a defiant step forward. "I am Anij. It's not our custom to have guests here at all, let alone hold anyone against their will." Sojeff spoke next. "The artificial life form would not allow them to leave." He told us they were our enemies and more would follow. Anij kept her unwavering gaze on Picard. "Are you our enemy?" For a moment, he was almost too overcome to speak, as if he were a giddy schoolboy with a crush. He gathered himself at once and straightened his uniform. "My people have a strict policy of non-interference with other cultures. In fact, it's our prime directive." Anij favored him with a withering smile. "Your directive apparently doesn't include spying on other cultures." A younger male who flanked Sojev spoke for the first time. There seemed to be a phase variance in the artificial lifeform's positronic matrix that we were unable to repair. Picard's jaw dropped a few centimeters, and Anij's wry smile widened. "I believe the captain finds it hard to believe that we'd have any skills repairing a positronic device." The ever-serious Sojev nodded. "Our technological abilities aren't apparent because we've chosen not to employ them in our daily lives." Anij added, "At one time, we explored the galaxy just as you do." Picard was even more astonished. "You have warp capability?" "Capability, yes. But where can warp drive take us except away from here?" At that precise instant, a scarlet hummingbird like a red-winged jewel appeared just behind her head and dipped its beak into her sun-lightened curls. Finding no nectar, it moved on. Behind him, Picard could hear the affectionate murmurs of Starfleet personnel taking leave of their Baku hosts. He gazed at Anij with sincerity. "I apologize for our intrusion." And he took his leave of them, quickly, before further contact with Anij, the Baku woman, made it any harder for him to go. Picard sat in his ready room, staring at the image of Admiral Dougherty on the monitor. It had all gone precisely as he expected. Dougherty had not rebuked him for rescuing the hostages on his own initiative. Far from it. He had listened approvingly to the captain's tale.
"You've done a terrific job, Jean-Luc. Now pack your bags and get the hell out of there."
Picard thought to himself. Obviously, I failed to find whatever he was hiding from me, or he wouldn't be so damn cheerful. Abruptly, the Admiral became more concerned.
"How's Data?"
"In stasis. LaForge is completing the diagnostic."
The Admiral gave a compassionate nod.
"We're heading back your way. Set a course to rendezvous with us so you can transfer the crew and equipment on your way out."
"You're not finished here, Admiral."
"Just a few loose ends to tie up. Dougherty out."
The monitor darkened, and Picard turned from it with a sigh. It was time to immerse himself once again in the myriad of annoying little missions Starfleet had planned for the Enterprise once she emerged from the Briar Patch. But at the moment, his gaze was drawn toward the observation window, where the beautiful planet of the Baku, wearing its rings like opalescent jewels, rotated. And he thought only of Anij. Anij with her cool voice and fiery eyes, wearing the crimson hummingbird like an adornment in her hair. As Geordi LaForge and the captain made their way down the corridors of engineering, LaForge explained what he had done.
"I had to reconstruct Data's neural net and replace these memory engrams."
Picard studied the pieces of gouged, scorched circuitry in LaForge's palm.
"How were they damaged?" "By a sonar weapon, Captain. The sonar reports claim they didn't fire until after he malfunctioned. I don't believe it happened that way. I know he was functioning normally until he was shot. Then his fail-safe system was activated." "Fail-safe?" "His ethical and moral subroutines took over all his basic functions. The system is designed to protect him against anyone who might try to take advantage of his memory loss."
Picard paused alongside LaForge as the engineer stopped at a closed panel sealed off with security codes. Geordi blinked down at them and actually squinted in an effort to see.
"Implants bother you, Geordi?"
He shook his head.
"I'm all right. I think I'm just tired." The panel slid open, revealing a deactivated Data. LaForge touched a control. Immediately, the android's eyes sprang open, then softened with recognition.
Geordi? Captain? You're on the Enterprise, Data.
Data half-lowered his eyelids as he ran a self-check.
I seem to be missing several memory engrams.
Geordi opened his palm to reveal the scorched circuits.
Oh, there they are.
Picard took a step nearer.
Data, what's the last thing you remember from the mission? I was in an isolation suit collecting physiometric data on Baku children. My last memory is going into the hills following a boy.
Inside the Sona body facility, Dougherty turned away from the comm panel to observe Ruafo undergoing yet another cosmetic procedure, this one more medical in nature. As the Sona reclined, eyes closed, a male medic lanced the ugly boils on his neck with a long syringe, which regularly filled with a disgusting-looking substance the color and texture of algae.
Adar, your body is producing far too many toxins. We've reached the limit of genetic manipulation.
Ruafo's small eyes opened with the languor of a sunning reptile, but the pointed look he directed at Dougherty was far from mellow.
I won't need any more genetic manipulation if our Federation friends allow us to complete this mission.
Dougherty looked away, cursing silently. From the beginning, Ruafo had been furious at Picard's interference, had insisted the Admiral order the Enterprise away. But Dougherty was unaccustomed to taking orders, much less those of a walking cadaver. Besides, he had explained to Ruafo it would stir up far more curiosity on Picard's behalf, curiosity that might cause the captain to contact command for verification, were he, Dougherty, to give an uncharacteristically harsh, unexplained order. But Picard had not simply collected his android and gone home, as the Admiral had fervently wished. Instead, the captain kept pushing. And if he pushed much farther... In truth, Dougherty had no idea what he would do. He could no more harm Jean-Luc than he could break his promise to his dead wife, his beloved Madeleine. The question was, how long could he keep Picard out of harm's way? On the planet's surface, Picard and Data followed Sojev to the copse of shade trees where the boy, Sojev's son, sat playing with a small wriggly toy wound about his fingers. Artem was his name. As Picard neared, he saw the toy was a brown creature that squirmed and slithered about the child's fingers, like a cross between a tiny caterpillar and a seal. Sojev spoke to the boy without introducing the others. Artem, do you remember where you were on the day of lightning when the artificial life form appeared to us? In the hills, Father, by the dam. Picard leaned down to the boy's height. Can you show us? In reply, Artem slipped his pet into his pocket and began moving toward the mountains. A small group of Baku followed curiously. It did not escape Picard's attention that the woman Anij was among them. He had come to find out why the Sona had attacked his friend and had no intention of losing his focus. But if fate should bring her his way during the investigation, he would not resist. As they walked, he gazed at her, openly inviting her to join him, and to his delight, she did. Her welcome, however, left something to be desired. Haven't you disrupted our lives enough? She was painfully candid, but he would have it no other way, and this time there was gentleness with the honesty. I understand how you feel. I just want to retrace Data's movements, that's all. Why, Captain? He almost answered truthfully, then caught himself. It would be foolish to make statements about the Sona until he was absolutely certain as to the exact circumstances of what happened. He broke off eye contact, though he still felt her gaze upon him. Pale, direct, fearless. Anij, I don't like to leave questions unanswered. Then you must spend your life answering questions. She increased her pace, leaving him behind.
nor did she bother to look back. Picard allowed himself a brief, admiring glance at her, then returned his attention to Artyom, who, as he walked, kept glancing fearfully up at Data. Data aligned his shimmering gold features into the friendliest possible expression. "Artyom, there is no need to fear me. I am operating within normal parameters now. They fixed me." Before Data could say anything further, Sojev stepped between his son and the android and put a protective hand upon Artyom's shoulder. Crestfallen, the android moved alongside Picard. "The boy is afraid of me, sir." "It's nothing personal, Data. You have to remember these people have rejected technology." Data released a sorrowful sigh. "And I am the personification of everything they have rejected." Picard nodded in reluctant agreement as Artyom led the group up into the rocky foothills. After the group made its way over a rise, Artyom pointed at a distant spot near a trio of boulders. "I saw the first bolt of lightning over there." Along with the Baku, Picard and Data had made their way down the hillside toward a primitive earthen dam and neighboring lake, the exact area where Artyom claimed to have seen the first blast of the strange lightning. Thus far, Picard had seen nothing unusual, except, of course, for the landscape's haunting beauty. An hour on the planet's surface felt like the equivalent of a months-long vacation. He felt younger, clearer, refreshed. Beside him, Data frowned down at the tricorder. Tricorder functions are limited due to heavy deposits of kelbonite in these hills. How about a passive radiation scan? Data at once adjusted his tricorder. Curious. There appear to be strong neutrino emissions coming from the lake. The tricorder readings led Data to the edge of the lake, then into ankle-deep water. Deeper and deeper until Data walked straight into the lake and disappeared beneath the water. Nearby, Artyom gasped and moved over to Picard. "Can he breathe underwater?" "Data doesn't breathe." "Won't he rust?" Picard smiled to himself. "No." A moment later, a large ripple appeared at the lake's far side, and Data emerged. "Sir, I believe I know what is causing the neutrino emissions." He climbed to the dam's top to a great iron wheel whose circumference equaled his height. Data turned it easily, opening a floodgate that emptied the lake. As the water rushed out, the remaining water was oddly displaced by what appeared to be nothing but empty air. One of the dark waterfowl fluttered overhead, then landed upon the top of the invisible structure. As the lake drained further, the shape became unmistakable. A ship. Data, still dripping, rejoined Picard. "The vessel is clearly Federation in origin, Captain." Determined to find the answer, Picard headed for one of the rowboats on the shore. Data followed. Artyom attempted to follow, but his father clamped a hand on his shoulder. "We're not interested in such things." Anij appeared and gave the Baku leader a contrary look. "I am." And before Picard could push off from the shore, she hopped on board and grabbed an oar. It did not take long before they arrived at the edge of the invisible vessel. Data pressed a sequence of controls on the tricorder. In the midst of the air, a slice of the ship's interior appeared and grew until the three of them stared into the entranceway. Picard drew his phaser. Beside him, Data did the same. The three of them climbed up into the hatch and stepped inside to the Baku village, complete with marketplace, meadow, and mountains. Anij gasped, her pale eyes wide. Data glanced up from his tricorder readout. "It's a holographic projection." Anij shook her head. "Why would someone want to create a hologram of our village?" "Data, if you were following the children and discovered this ship..." The android finished the thought. "It is conceivable I was shot to protect the secret of its existence." The captain nodded. "What possible purpose could a duplicate village have except to deceive the Baku, to move them off this planet?"
Within a few days, they'd be relocated on a similar planet without ever realizing it. Why would the Federation or the Sona wish to move the Baku? A brilliant flash of plasma streaked between Picard and Anij and struck the bulkhead behind them. Data at once returned fire. Picard ducked, seized Anij, and shoved her out of the hatch. She landed in the water outside with a loud splash, while Picard crouched in the hatch and himself began firing. Bit by bit, the hollow village grew pockmarked with metal grids. At last, a figure, a male Sona, fell unconscious to the deck. The firing at once ceased. Computer, end program and decloak the vessel. Picard leaned out the hatch just as its silvery exterior appeared. Outside, Anij thrashed in the water, choking and coughing. I can't swim. Picard dove promptly into the cold water. Within a heartbeat, the captain reached for her, pulled her to him. Don't panic. She held onto his arms and calmed a bit, her sunlight-pale eyes shooting sparks of indignation. I've been shot at, thrown into the lake out of an invisible ship that's come to abduct us all. What's there to panic about? Data suddenly appeared in the water beside them. In the event of a water landing, I've been designed to serve as a flotation device. With a twist of his neck, the android rose waist-high above the surface, fully buoyant in the water. If Anij shared any of her people's disdain for artificial life forms, she failed to show it at that instant. Instead, she clung gratefully to the floating android while Picard swam over to retrieve the rowboat. With each stroke, Picard grew more furious. Surely Matt Dougherty could not be willingly involved in deceiving an entire race. This had to be the Sona's doing. At any rate, he was determined to find out. Picard was still wet and angry by the time he and Data materialized in the Enterprise transporter room. Worf met them, and the captain looked up at him.
Worf, did any of the hostages mention a cloaked ship during their debriefings?
No, sir.
Then debrief them again.
Picard hurried out into the corridor. Riker was on the move toward them, prompting the captain's double take. His second-in-command looked younger, but it was more than that. He was missing something vital. His beard. Riker grinned at the reactions of his fellow officers to his freshly denuded cheeks and chin.
Smooth as an android's bottom, eh, Data?
The android blinked.
I beg your pardon, sir.
Riker didn't answer. He directed all his attention to the captain.
Admiral Dougherty wants to know why we haven't left yet.
Picard's expression grew stony.
We're not going anywhere.
Worf turned to the captain.
Dr. Crusher asked to talk to you when you returned.
Picard touched his comlink.
Picard to Crusher.
Captain, the Sona hostages declined to be examined. I had them confined to quarters.
And our people?
They all have slightly elevated levels of endorphin production, probably the result of the environmental anomalies here. They're fine. Better than fine. Increased metabolism, high energy, improved muscle tone. We should all be so lucky.
Very good, Doctor. Picard out.
Picard turned to Worf.
Don't release the Sona officers until I've met with Adar Ruafo.
As Picard left to go to his quarters, he caught a glimpse of Data running a finger along Riker's clean-shaven chin.
No, sir, it is not. As smooth as an android's bottom.
Once inside his quarters, Picard moved to the bathroom and began to unfasten his collar.
Computer, music. No, not that. Something Latin.
Picard felt the muscles of his neck and shoulders ease, felt his hips begin to sway in rhythm.
That's more like it.
He began to unfasten his collar. It was still damp. Finally, Picard registered that the collar had been loose because the skin of his neck was taut, firm.
young. He searched for the familiar wrinkles around his eyes, upon his brow. The newer ones, gone. The older, distinctly fainter. He thought of the Sona, aged, decrepit, a dying race, and at last understood. Night on the planet of the Baku, an indigo sky so bright with tens of thousands of stars that Picard barely registered the absence of a moon. He knocked upon the wooden door of a house sculpted from clay. Anij opened the door and regarded him with stellar, pale eyes. Picard did not hesitate. "Anij, how old are you?" In response to the captain's question, Anij summoned Sojef, as well as the younger leader known as Turnell. Sojef told him about the Baku. "We came here from a solar system on the verge of annihilation, where technology had created weapons that threatened to destroy all life. A small group of us set off to find a new home, a home that would be isolated from the threats of other worlds. That was 309 years ago." Picard looked at him in awe. "You've not aged a day since then?" Sojef shrugged. "Actually, I was a good deal older when we arrived, in terms of my physical condition." Anij unwrapped her arms and leaned forward. "There's an unusual metaphasic radiation coming from the planet's rings. It continuously regenerates our genetic structure. You must have noticed the effects by now." Picard gave her a small, sheepish smile. "We've just begun to." Artem handed Picard a cup of tea. It smelled of pomegranates and flowers. He looked up at the boy. "I suppose you're 75. Artem blinked at him. "No, I'm 12. The adult smiled, and Turnell explained. "The metaphasic radiation won't begin to affect him until he reaches maturity." Picard took a sip of the hot tea, then expressed his thoughts. "To many offlanders, what you have here would be more valuable than gold-pressed latinum. And I'm afraid it's the reason that someone is trying to take this world away from you." Artem's large eyes widened. "The artificial life form was right?" Picard gave a reluctant nod. "If not for data, you'd probably have been relocated by now." Turnell looked at the group. "How can we possibly defend ourselves?" Sojef suddenly rose from his seat. "The moment we pick up a weapon, we become one of them. We lose everything we are." Picard countered swiftly. "It may not come to that. Clearly, the architects of this conspiracy have tried to keep it a secret, not just from you, but from my people as well. I don't intend to let them." Outside, the air was redolent with the fragrance of night-blooming flowers. Picard and Anij strolled down the deserted main street, having escorted the others home. As she walked, Anij looked up at the stars. In her eyes was a muted sorrow. "We've always known that to survive we had to remain apart. It hasn't been easy. Many of the young people here want to know more about the offland." Picard answered softly. "Most of my people who live that faster pace would sell their souls to slow it down." "But not you. You don't live up to your reputation as an offlander, Picard." With a rush of sudden warmth to his cheeks, he blushed, something he hadn't done since a teenager. "Picard, let me ask you a question. Have you ever experienced a perfect moment in time?" He gazed at her, puzzled. "A perfect moment?" "Yes, when time seems to stop, and you could almost live in that moment." He nodded enthusiastically. "Seeing my home planet from space for the first time." In her excitement, she seized his wrist. "Yes, exactly. Nothing more complicated than perception. You explore the universe. We've discovered a single moment in time can be a universe in itself." Her face glowed incandescent with an interior joy. Picard smiled at her.
I wish I could spare a few centuries to learn.
Picard, it took us centuries to learn that it doesn't have to take centuries to learn. They were at her door, and too soon she stepped over the threshold into her house. Once inside, she glanced back over her shoulder at him and smiled. And then she was gone. He could very well have beamed up at that instant, but he could not let go of the moment. Instead, he turned and walked out onto the empty street and watched the horizon brighten with a coral glow. He noticed in the feeble light the solitary silhouette of a man also watching the encroaching dawn. Geordie? LaForge turned, and Picard was momentarily struck dumb. Gone were the engineer's white optical implants. In their place were ordinary human eyes, with irises of soft, deep brown. Funniest thing, Captain, there wasn't anything wrong with my implants. There was something right with my eyes. When Dr. Crusher removed the ocular connections, she found the cells around my optic nerves had regenerated. It may not last after we leave. I just wanted, before we go, I've never seen a sunrise, at least not the way you see them. Without a word, Picard turned to the coming dawn. Geordie followed his gaze, and together they watched as the sun's rays peeked over the distant mountains. Slowly, the homes, the meadow, the square began to lighten from gray monochrome to the entire brilliant spectrum of color. Picard looked, smiling, to LaForge, then turned away at the sight of a single crystalline tear sliding down Geordie's dark cheek. As Picard sat in his ready room, trying to concentrate on one of the pads taken from the stack spread out on his desk, his thoughts were elsewhere, on the Baku planet and the two unannounced visitors bound to arrive any instant. He had detained the Sona officers for precisely that reason, to force Dougherty and Ruafo to react, to come onto his, Picard's, turf for a confrontation. Ruafo swept in a full step ahead of Dougherty, a furious ghoul. Even the carefully applied powder on Ruafo's cheeks could not hide the dark flush of anger there.
Am I to understand that you're not releasing my men, Captain?
Picard set the pad aside and fixed both men with a look.
We found the hollow ship.
Dougherty shifted uncomfortably, his gaze directed inward and clearly unhappy with what he saw.
Ruafo, why don't you let the captain and me?
Ruafo's face contorted so vehemently with rage that the tightly stretched scar on his forehead split open, leaving rills of blood in its wake.
No! This entire mission has been one Federation blunder after another. You will return my men, or this alliance will end with the destruction of your ship.
And with a darkly glittering swirl of robes, he left. After a while, the Admiral spoke. I'm acting on orders from the Federation Council. The Prime Directive doesn't apply because these people are not indigenous to this planet. They were never meant to be immortal. We'll simply be restoring their natural evolution.
Picard stood aghast. Who are we to decide the next course of evolution for these people?
Picard, there are 600 people down there. We'll be able to use the regenerative properties of this radiation to help billions. The Sona have developed a procedure to collect the metaphasic particles from the planet's rings.
A planet in Federation space, Admiral.
Right. We have the planet, and they have the technology. That makes us partners. Picard leaned forward with equal heat.
Our partners are no more than petty thugs.
Dougherty dismissed the notion with a wave. On Earth, petroleum once turned petty thugs into world leaders. Warp drive transformed a bunch of Romulan thugs into an empire. We can handle the Sona. I'm not worried about that. Picard thought of the 4 nearby Sona ships, each of them dwarfing the Enterprise.
Someone probably said the same thing about the Romulans a century ago. Picard, with metaphasics, lifespans will be doubled. An entire new medical science will evolve.
He looked at Picard, his gaze one of hope mixed with a grief so profound that the captain almost took pity.
I understand your chief engineer has the use of his eyes for the first time in his life. Would you take that away from him?
It was a difficult, if not impossible, question to answer. Picard thought of all the loved ones lost over so many years. His parents, grandparents, great-grandparents might all still be alive this moment. Was it right to take from the Baku to give to them? Picard thought that there had to be another way without destroying a culture, a world.
Admiral, there are metaphasic particles all over the Briar Patch. Why does it have to be this planet? The concentration in the rings is what makes the whole damn thing work. I only know they inject something into the rings that starts a thermolytic reaction. After it's over, the planet will be unlivable for generations. Admiral, delay the procedure. Let my people look at the technology. The sonar can establish a separate colony on this planet until we find another way to do this.
Dougherty shook his head.
It would take 10 years of normal exposure to begin to reverse their condition. Some of them won't survive that long. Admiral, we are betraying the very principles upon which the Federation was founded. This will destroy the Baku, just as cultures have been destroyed in every other forced relocation throughout history.
Dougherty sighed.
Jean-Luc, we are only moving 600 people.
Picard stared at him.
How many people does it take before it becomes wrong? 1,000? 50,000? 1,000,000?
Dougherty's expression went cold.
I'm ordering you to the Goran system. I'm also ordering the release of the Sona officers. File whatever protests you wish to. By the time you do, this will all be done.
When he was gone, Picard sat down heavily to contemplate not only the future of the Baku, but his own. On the bridge, Riker noticed it first. Something in the cant of Picard's head, the peculiar intensity in his eyes as he stepped from his ready room. Picard moved deliberately over to him and issued the order.
Prepare the ship for departure at 0700 hours.
Riker knew the captain was hiding something. He watched as Picard crossed slowly to the turbo lift. Before entering it, the captain paused, and as subtly as possible swept his gaze over the bridge. Memorizing it, Riker realized with a flash of intuition. Imprinting it on his memory because he never expected to see it again. Picard would remain behind in direct violation of a superior's order. A court-martial offense. Aboard the Sona flagship, Subadar Gallatin entered the body sculpture chamber and chided himself for his newfound perspective. After weeks among the Baku, he was beginning to find the Sona love of artifice offensive. It had been hard enough to watch the Baku from the shelter of the duck blind, but after the android destroyed it, it had been even harder to sit among them, to see the joy they took in each other, in their children, to remember a way of life that called for not deceit, but trust. He moved quickly past the cubicles until he arrived where the Adar sat, his head locked in a face-tautening frame. The recently erupted scar upon Ruafo's forehead had already been resealed.
Gallatin, so the righteous Starfleet captain finally released you. Did you encounter any problems on the surface?
No, sir. But it wasn't easy, being among them.
Ruafo dismissed Gallatin's distress without an atom of empathy.
Just don't forget what they did to us. We'll have them rounded up in a day or two. Just get the holding cells ready. Gallatin acknowledged with a nod and told himself, "You are being more than kind. They sent you off to die. All you're doing is returning the favor." He turned and left, not before catching Ruafo's words to the cosmetician. "I'm going to miss these little flesh-stretching sessions of ours, my dear." On the Enterprise, inside the cockpit of the captain's yacht, an out-of-uniform Picard worked the transporter controls and watched as several cases of military supplies materialized on the platform. Data's voice emanated from behind Picard. "Rerouting the transport grid to avoid detection was wise, but the transporter is rarely used after 0200 hours." Beside the android stood Deanna Troi, Beverly Crusher, Geordi LaForge, Commander Worf, and Will Riker. All but Riker and LaForge were out of uniform. Troi tilted her head and gave Picard a cat-caught-the-mouse smile. "Taking the captain's yacht out for a spin?" Worf had already moved onto the transporter platform and was inspecting the cargo. 7 metric tons of ultritium explosives, 8 Tetrion pulse launchers, 10 isomagnetic disintegrators. Clearly, they had divined what their captain was about to do. "Return to your quarters. That's an order." Riker gave him a look as impenetrable as his own. "No uniform? No orders." LaForge stepped forward. "Captain, how could I look at another sunrise knowing what my sight cost these people?" Data interrupted the warmth of the moment. "I feel obliged to point out that the environmental anomalies may be stimulating certain rebellious instincts common to youth that could affect everyone's judgment. Except mine, of course." Crusher turned to him. "Okay, Data. What do you think we should do?" The android studiously regarded each person in the group, then blinked. "Saddle up. Lock and load." At that, the crew turned their attention back to the captain, awaiting instructions. "They won't begin the procedure while the planet is inhabited, so our job is to keep the planet inhabited. Will, Geordi, go back and put a face on what's happening here. Make the Council see the Baku. It's too easy to turn a blind eye to the suffering of an unfamiliar people." Riker acknowledged with a confident nod. "I'll be back before you know it." Picard held his second-in-command's gaze a second longer. "Will, we'll hold out for as long as we can." Pad in hand, Gallatin strode into the tactical room of the Sona ship, feeling the painful pull of a deep frown in his too-taut brow. He resented any interference in the Baku project, and had counted on it going swiftly, cleanly, in part because he did not want to have to think about what the Sona were doing here. He stepped up behind Ruafo, who was for the umpteenth time watching a simulation of the injection procedure. Over Ruafo's shoulder, Gallatin watched the screen as the streamlined, elegantly small injector assembly sailed into the outermost of the planet's rings and fired bright blasts that flared blue, then surged through violet to red until the ring was consumed, trembling as if ablaze. And then the next ring, and the next, until Gallatin beheld a world of fire. At his first viewing he had thought it beautiful. Now it simply annoyed him. Ruafo apparently sensed his presence. "The injector performs perfectly in every situation." "Sir, as the Enterprise left orbit, one of their support craft went down to the surface. It appeared to be the captain's yacht, 5 persons on board." Ruafo's expression grew stony. "Take shuttles and get everyone off the surface tonight. And Gallatin, if Picard or any of his people interfere, eliminate them."
was the end of the world, Artem decided. As the boy watched Turnell ring the great summoning bell, he had never felt so afraid. Fear was in the night air, in the swift, urgent movements of the Baku who tied supplies onto the backs of pack animals, in the eyes of the children dragged along by their parents. Artem started as a brilliant burst of light twinkled beside him. He swung about to see the artificial life form who had apparently just activated a device. It is a transport inhibitor. It will help prevent sonar ships from beaming anyone off the surface. Overwhelmed by fright, Artem backed away toward the group where his father stood talking with Anij and the starship captain. At the moment, Picard was holding up the geoscans of the planet's surface to Anij and Sojev.
These veins of kelbonite running through the hills will interfere with our transporters. When the terrain forces us away from the deposits, we'll use transport inhibitors to compensate. The mountains have the highest concentration of kelbonite. Once we're there, transport will be virtually impossible.
Anij nodded. There are caves in those mountains. We can hold them off a long time once we get there. Data approached. Captain, we have activated transport inhibitors around the village.
Good Data. Let's move these people out.
Worf hesitated.
Should I distribute phasers to the Baku, sir?
The captain shook his head.
No. We'll be responsible for that, Mr. Worf.
Most of the villagers made it through the open fields into the meadow. However, as the people reached the narrow pass leading up into the mountains, their progress slowed. With the others, Picard looked up to see the lights of sonar shuttlecraft, bright, blinking, and malignant against the starlit dark. Suddenly, the ground beneath them lurched. One of the brightly lit devices, a transporter inhibitor, had exploded, then darkened. Worf cried out to Captain Picard.
We've lost 3 transport inhibitors. There's a gap in the field.
Suddenly, to the front and the right, running Baku shimmered and then simply disappeared. Artem tried to hold onto his father's hand, but felt himself slowly pushed away. With horror, Artem watched his father's form shimmer, then disappear as if it had never existed, had never set foot upon this path. And then a very strong arm scooped him up and held him as if he were still a small child. Artem looked up in total bewilderment at the pale golden face of the artificial life form. My father! Your father has been transported to a spaceship. He has not been harmed. Artem accepted the explanation and let himself be carried forward through the pushing crowd past Captain Picard, who was calling out.
Stay in the protected areas. We'll be safe when we get into the hills.
Inside the sonar tactical room with Ruafo and Dougherty, Gallatin pointed to the large wall display, a geoscan of the Baku foothills.
They're following the kelbonite deposits, using the interference to block our transporters.
Ruafo looked at Dougherty.
Recommendations?
Dougherty sensed the fury lurking behind the question.
If you had not been so meek, Starfleet Admiral, if you had permitted my people to destroy that damned android.
And why didn't I? Dougherty asked himself. During his long career, he had always been decisive. No one could ever have accused him of being mild-mannered or confused. At least, not until Madeline had died. Now he was weary of conflict, of pain. But at the moment, the Admiral was filled with anger at Ruafo for his damnable condescension, anger at Picard for interfering. Dougherty addressed the Adar.
Take me down. Let me talk to Picard.
Ruafo sneered.
We should send down an assault team.
That is not an acceptable option. If people get hurt, all the support we have in the Federation will...
Look in the mirror, Admiral. The Federation is old. In the last 24 months, it's been challenged by every major power in the quadrant. the Borg, the Cardassians, the Dominion. They all smell the scent of death on the Federation. That's why you've embraced our offer, because it will give your dear Federation new life. Well, how badly do you want it, Admiral? If the Enterprise gets through with news about their brave captain's valiant struggle on behalf of the defenseless Baku, your Federation politicians will waver. Your Federation opinion polls will open a public debate. Need I go on?
Dougherty drew in a deep breath. His choice was clear. Certainly, virtual immortality and perfect health were worth the relocation of 600 people. But were they worth the killing of Picard and his crew? Dougherty made his decision.
I'll order Riker to turn around.
Smirking, Ruafu eyed him.
Picard's first officer. Do you really believe he'll listen? My ships are capable of intercepting the Enterprise before it reaches the perimeter. I could send them to escort it back. But Commander Riker might not want to come.
Dougherty closed his eyes and thought of Madeline and that terrible last day. With a pain that felt like a coiled serpent squeezing tight around his gut, he opened his eyes and looked at Ruafo.
Send your ships.
Dawn was turning the sky rosy against the mountains as the Baku, now deep into the foothills, wound their way into the steeper terrain near the mountains. As the trail grew abruptly steep, Artem groaned. His thigh muscles burned with effort. He turned to the android. "Don't you ever get tired?" Data shook his head. "My power cells continually recharge themselves. I can't imagine what it would be like to be a machine." Data studied the boy for a long time. "Perhaps it would surprise you to know that I have often tried to imagine what it would be like to be a child." "Really? But you've never had adults telling you what to do all the time, or bedtimes, or having to eat food you don't like?" "I would gladly accept the requirement of a bedtime in exchange for knowing what it is like to be a child." There was a wistfulness in the android's tone that made Artem want to help. "Do machines ever play?" "I play the violin, and my chess routines are quite advanced." Artem shook his head. "No, I mean, haven't you ever just played for fun?" Data drew back his head slightly, tucking his chin. "Androids don't have fun. Look, if you want to know what it's like to be a child, you need to learn to play." A tired but exuberant Picard made his way along the trail, amazed by his own endurance, by Anisia's. A few hours ago, they had entered a part of the trail flanked on either side by towering peaks so beautifully carved by wind and sand, Picard was reminded of his homeland's great Gothic cathedrals. Now Dawn was peering through the latticework. Behind them, a long line of Baku with occasional pack animals trailed. Worf caught up to him.
"Captain, the Baku could use some rest, sir. According to the geoscan, this may be the safest area for the next few kilometers."
"Very well. We'll take an hour. Break out some rations." The Klingon returned to his position lower on the trail, while Picard, with Anij at his side, moved forward through blooming sage-scented brush in order to better see the path ahead. On the banks of a running brook not far from a mountain waterfall, the captain stopped to rest. The two of them sat cross-legged, his left knee pressed against her right. He pulled from his belt a pair of field glasses and examined in more detail what faced them. More brush, then another ridge, this one not so steep. Anij pointed with a graceful arm. "Right beyond that ridge is where the caves begin. We can hide for days." Picard did not share her enthusiasm. He remembered the fury in Ruafo's eyes. The Adar was not going to let this be easy. Suddenly, he jumped and pulled the glasses down, startled by a soft, tickling stroke across the bare crown of his head. Anij was smiling. "It's been 300 years since I've seen a bald man." He grinned back at her, surprised and delighted. "Anij, how is it a woman like you never married?" She blinked her eyes, coyly innocent. "What's the rush?" "I should warn you. I've always been attracted to older women." In reply, she took his hands in hers. At that instant, Picard's world slowed. The droplets spawned by the waterfall took on prismatic brilliance, each hovering in the air like a miniature gem. The cascade of water itself took on the indistinct texture of velvet. Following Anij's lead, Picard knelt beside the water. She guided his hand in hers into the brook, and he felt the cool water flow through his fingers, embrace every atom of flesh, almost too pleasurable to bear. And when he thought he could bear it no longer, Anij drew their hands from the water, skin glistening. She touched his arm, and now it was Anij and Picard themselves who slowed. And he knew at once why he loved her, just as he loved the stars, because she was radiant, mysterious, ancient. She leaned forward and brushed her lips against his, teasingly, then pressed full against them for eternity as Picard surrendered himself to bliss. Aboard the Enterprise, Will Riker sat at command and checked the view screen for the 1,000th time. The Enterprise was still wading slowly through the briar patch. A sixth sense had set off a silent warning in his head. Something was about to happen. Something not good. Perhaps part of his apprehension came from his rekindled passion for Deanna. It had been difficult to leave her on the planet's surface at the mercy of the Sona. He missed her presence on the bridge, though it was now in the hands of Perham, LaForge, Daniels, and himself. The Trill, Perham, turned her head so that a singular cord stood out on her delicate neck. "Commander, I'm showing 2 sonar ships on an intercept course." "How long till they reach us?" 18 minutes. From Ops, Geordi LaForge announced, "We're not going to be able to get a transmission out of here for at least another hour." The ship shuddered gently. Riker glanced down immediately at his monitor for a sensor reading. "A photon torpedo. Full impulse." LaForge took issue. "Commander, the manifolds can't handle full impulse in the briar patch." Riker silenced his engineer with a look. "If we don't outrun the sonar ships, the manifolds are going to be the only thing left of this ship." LaForge nodded. "I'll be in engineering." As Geordi left, his post quickly replaced by another officer, Riker called out, "Red alert! All hands, battle stations!" With the sonar ships in pursuit through the briar patch, Riker took a step forward to stand directly behind Ensign Perham's chair at Khan. He gestured with his chin at the screen. "What's inside that nebula cluster?" Perham checked her sensors. "Cometary debris, pockets of unstable Metreon gas. We don't want to go in there, sir." "Yes, we do, Ensign. I'll take it from here." She rose and moved over to Ops. Riker slid behind the Khan and smiled grimly to himself. Time to use the briar patch like Brer Rabbit did. Picard, his heart open with joy, was walking hand in hand with Anij back toward the others, specifically toward Worf and Data, when he saw the sonar come. 12 shuttles in formation, shining and sinister in the morning light. Picard thought that Ruafo had had his way and the vessels had come to kill them. But no, they never fired. They were pregnant with a different evil. Each shuttle gave birth to a dozen or more drones, silver, whirring, twice the size of a large human's fist. And alive, blinking red, blue, white, scanning, sensing. Like furious hornets, they descended from the sky in swarms and assailed their targets. The Baku scattered. Picard instinctively grabbed his phaser and began firing. The captain managed to destroy one drone, Worf another, but a third drone in the swarm managed to launch a small non-plasma weapon. Swiftly, it struck its mark, the back of a Baku woman, and before Picard or anyone else could react, she dematerialized in front of them. Around the Starfleet officers, Baku were scattering and dematerializing. Worf shouted to Picard, "Isolinear tags. Their transporters can lock onto them. Worf, we have to find shelter." Picard looked to Anij for the answer. She pointed ahead. "There's a cavern at the base of the next hill." Picard made a large, sweeping gesture to the entire encampment. "This way." The Baku began to move. It was going to be difficult to hold on. For every drone they managed to destroy, 2 or 3 more arrived to take its place. When at last Picard stood in the mouth of the cavern, feeling the steam and smelling the sulfur of the hot mineral springs hidden inside, he never took his eyes off the sky and the swarms of drones that kept coming. More and more Baku were dematerializing despite his firing his phaser until his fingertip was numb. "Into the cavern. Move!" In the crowd, Artin saw how technology could be used to do horrible, hurtful things. At the same time, he felt safest running next to the artificial life form, Data. Suddenly, one of the bad people, a Sona, accompanied by 2 soldiers of a different race, appeared in front of them all on the treacherous ledge. They had come to take prisoners. Would the android fire his phaser and disintegrate them, just as he had the little ships? Would he kill? Data ran, lunging low and spreading his arms into the 3 males, knocking them cleanly off the cliff. It was a long, fatal fall to the bottom, and Artin released a silent sob. He had trusted Data to be different from what he had heard of Offlanders. But now, Father was right. All technology was wicked. Yet the android snatched one of the little ships clean from the air and aimed it at the 3 falling men. The device whirred, then shot an almost invisible blur of tiny metallic objects toward the 3. They must have hit their falling targets because one instant the 3 men were there, then the next, they were gone, which meant they were now safe back aboard their own ship. Despite his fear, Artin grinned, faith restored. The ride aboard the Enterprise was rough, so rough that Riker fancied he felt his internal organs vibrating. Lieutenant Daniels turned. "Sir, they've detonated an isolytic burst. A subspace tear is forming." "On screen." The scene on the main viewer shifted to show an actual rift in space, a growing nothingness that was darker than black. In an instant, it would consume the Enterprise and spit her out into normal space, where she would be a sitting duck for the fast Sona ships. From Ops, Perham shook her head. "I thought subspace weapons were banned by the Khitomer Accords." Riker gave a grim smile. "Remind me to lodge a protest." LaForge's voice came over comm. "Commander, our warp core is acting like a magnet to the tear. We're pulling it like a zipper across space." "Options?" "We could eject the core." "Will that stop the tear?" "You got me, Commander." Daniels called out, "Impact in 15 seconds." Riker told LaForge, "Eject the core." "Detonate." Abruptly, the darkness of the tear in space dissolved in an all-consuming flash of whiter than white. Then the first wave hit and threw Riker down hard, slamming him to the deck. He gritted his teeth, waiting. Either the Enterprise would now be destroyed or the spatial disturbance would ease. Slowly, the ship righted herself. As quickly as he could, he crawled back to the con. As he pulled himself up into his chair, Daniels called out, "It worked, Commander. The tear's been sealed." Immediately, LaForge's voice filtered over comm.
There's nothing to stop them from doing it again, and we're fresh out of warp cores.
Ensign Perham delivered the final blow. "Sir, we're still 36 minutes from transmission range." Riker nodded, then announced to the bridge, "We're through running from these bastards." He'd be damned if he'd let the Sona win now. Damned if he'd let the Enterprise be destroyed. "Geordi, are those pockets of Metreon gas?"
Aye, sir. Highly volatile. I recommend we keep our distance.
"Negative. I want to use the ram scoop to collect as much of it as we can. I intend to shove it down the Sona's throat." Daniels spoke up, clearly dismayed. "Commander, if one of their weapons hits that gas..." Riker turned to Daniels with eyes so steely the lieutenant fell silent at once. "It's our only way out of here, Mr. Daniels." Down in engineering, Geordi manipulated the controls and squinted at the readout that showed the scoop gathering up gas pockets. He spoke to Riker over the comm.
I wouldn't be surprised if history remembers this as the Riker maneuver.
"If it works, Geordi." LaForge grinned.
Even if it doesn't, they'll be teaching kids at the Academy not to do this for years to come.
When sensors indicated that the ram scoop had reached its limits, Geordi announced,
Bridge. Storage cells are at maximum capacity.
Riker wasted no time acknowledging. "Computer, access manual steering column." The sleek column popped up from the console. "Transfer helm controls to manual." The screen display shifted to reveal the two Sona vessels as the Enterprise closed in on them. "Sir, they're powering their forward weapons array." Riker stared intently at the hostile ships. If death was coming, it would arrive in the next heartbeat or two. "Blow out the ram scoop." LaForge called from engineering.
Ram scoop released.
Riker pressed a control on the column. At once, the Enterprise lurched, swinging away at the irritatingly slow pace of 1/3 impulse. If she failed now to put enough space between herself and her attackers, she too would be destroyed. On screen, a brilliant blast of plasma emerged from each of the Sona vessels, only to be caught in the large translucent globe of gas directly in front of them. The globe flared, radiant as a star gone nova, then exploded in a fiery burst. Riker slammed against the console. The force of the explosion sent the Enterprise hurtling away at full impulse. With enormous effort, he managed to grasp the manual control. At the same time, he caught a glimpse of the receding Sona ships, one disintegrating into fiery debris, the other intact but ablaze. For an instant, a faint smile played on his lips. Until, that is, the manual control proved unresponsive. Riker fought desperately to regain control of the helm, but the ship was careening out of control. With Worf and Anij resting by his side, Picard stood near the mouth of the hydrothermal cavern and stared at the small silver drones hovering menacingly on the other side of a force field. Time might just be on their side. Picard turned from the cavern's mouth to regard the scene behind him. The cavern's entrance was dry, but the path immediately descended and was filled ankle-deep with thin, pale mud. The Baku had waded through several meters of this until they made it to dry ground where most of them, including Data's little friend Artem, sat exhausted alongside their pack animals. The rest had wandered further back into the cavern along narrow corridors. From one of these corridors, Data emerged. "Another 43 people reported taken, sir." Picard frowned, sighing. The captain exchanged a grim look with Worf.
Captain, they're trying to force us out so their drones can tag us.
Data, meantime, was calmly studying a readout on his tricorder. With all the hydrothermal vents in the substrata, the structural integrity is not going to hold for long. Picard turned toward Anij.
Is there any other way out of here?
Grimly, she shook her head. Data cocked his head and thought. Tracking the water's course may reveal another exit. Picard followed as Data began scanning the pale walls with the tricorder. The two of them moved deeper into the cavern, deeper until they passed all of the frightened Baku and skittish animals. At last, Data stopped. He aimed the tricorder at the wall. I'm showing a nitrogen-oxygen flow behind this calcite formation, Captain.
Data, will the structure hold if we blast through?
I believe it is safe, sir. The captain drew his phaser. Data followed suit. Together they burned a hole into the limestone wall. Picard stepped through first into a lighter, airier cave with a large natural exit. He saw several different paths lead up to the nearby mountains, where a half-dozen cave openings could be seen.
Get everyone into those caves. Set up force fields once you're inside.
Data nodded, and the two of them hurried back to gather up the Baku. Ground and sky still thundered as Picard and his officers led another group of some 70 Baku through the hole drilled in the pale calcite wall, then out through the new exit where several paths led toward other nearby caves. They had already herded several groups to safety. Only one, which included Anij, remained in the original cavern. She had refused to leave with the first groups. She insisted that her unofficial status as one of the secondary town leaders required her to help Tornell keep those remaining behind calm, and to ready them when the time came to leave. Picard did not argue, could do nothing but respect her decision, admire her bravery. And while he left a good deal of his heart behind with her, he, as always, took his entire mind and attention with him when he helped the Baku cross the short but unsheltered path from old cavern to new. With Worf nearby, Picard ran at the head of the group of Baku. Most of the group was coughing. The explosions had contaminated the sweet air with dust that slightly obscured vision and stung the back of the throat. The pack animals were now squealing, surly, and sometimes bolting, small children stumbling, and overburdened adults occasionally dropping supplies in the path and stopping abruptly to pick them up. Most of all, the captain pitied Crusher, who was in the center of the group, and Data and Troy, who were bringing up the rear, all of them following where the animals had already trodden. But over the steep, uneven terrain, the Baku men and women were strong and sure-footed despite their exhaustion. The group was not far from the targeted cave when Picard's peripheral vision was seared by spontaneous brilliance. Beside him, Worf halted abruptly and pointed.
Up there.
Behind the crest of a nearby ridge, a small squadron of Eloran and Tarlac soldiers squatted, along with their more elaborately dressed Sona commander. New blasts of plasma came perilously close to the weary evacuees.
Data, Troy, keep these people moving. Worf, with me.
At once, the android and Troy raced to the front of the crowd and began leading their charges away from the attack toward the mountains. Picard detached his phaser from his belt while Worf took an ominously large weapon, a double-barreled isomagnetic disintegrator, from his backpack. The captain wounded one of the Tarlac and ate away at the ridge overhead until Worf at last hoisted the huge disintegrator in his arms and took aim. Part of the crest vibrated, then spilled down the hill as individual grains of sand. The force of the explosion hurled the soldiers backwards, all except the Sona officer, who fell forward and rolled, head, legs, and arms limp, downward, all the way down until he at last lay only meters from the entrance to the cavern, where Anij waited with the last of the Baku. Beverly Crusher stopped to kneel in the dust beside the wounded Sona. She lifted her tricorder and scanned her patient. Picard moved cautiously to her as she proffered him the tricorder. "Look at this med scan." He took it from her, studied it briefly. It was a normal readout for a Baku, but the man who lay in front of them was Sona. The captain gazed back at Crusher. How could this be possible? Crusher gave a little disbelieving shake of her head. Maybe we should ask the Baku. Inside the exit cavern that led to escape, Artem waited. He had felt obliged to stay and help Turnell and Anij. Now they were readying the very last group. They organized the group into 6 pairs and began filing them, 2 at a time, through the gap in the wall out into the day. Artem was in the final pair. As he neared the opening in the wall, he absently gave his pocket a gentle pat and started as he realized it was empty. His palm pet had run away. Artem rushed back into the belly of the cavern. Anij, meantime, was working hard to ignore the overhead blasts that made the bones in her head vibrate. Silt from the cavern ceiling floated down and settled on her head. She forced her attention to remain on the last group of her people to make a run for the higher caverns when she turned around to look for Artem. She couldn't find him. Artem? She loved the boy as her son, and if Sojev survived this, she would never be able to face him again if she let his only child perish. She spun about and ran back through the narrow, muddy corridors to the large room where they had first taken refuge. And there was Artem on his knees as he scooped up his palm pet from the damp ground, then held his open hand level with his nose and smiled at the little creature. Artem! He turned to regard Anij owlishly, clearly unaware of the crime he had just committed. She seized his arm and dragged him along with her. Overhead, a cascade of pebbles spilled down, grazing Anij's shoulder. Picard was gasping by the time he and his away team made it back down to the cavern exit, where Turnell waited with the last evacuation group. "Captain," Anij went to find Artem. She called from inside the cavern. "I've got him." Picard acted without an instant's thought. He ran and met her and Artem in the corridor that led to the largest part of the cavern. She was pushing the boy ahead of her, forcing him to run faster as pebbles rained down from the ceiling. The cavern took a direct hit. The ground swelled like an ocean wave. Above them, solid rock started separating, falling. Coughing, Picard caught Artem by the arm and flung him out of the cave. He turned back and stretched a hand toward Anij, who was reaching back toward him. A stone struck the back of his head. He dropped, groaning, to his knees, then looked up. Anij had disappeared from sight. Another rock struck his shoulder, forcing him face down into the mud. The rocks kept coming until his lungs were full of dust, and he felt himself spinning down into darkness. Picard's final shove sent Artem hurtling forward, forced to run to the exit or fall face down into the slippery mud. As the world was collapsing around him, he stumbled through the opening, and Data's strong arms caught his thin ones. "Anij!" She had risked her life for his, and so had Captain Picard. How could he live if they both were dead? Data gently turned the boy about to speak to him. "Turnell will take you the rest of the way." I want to stay with you." The android was entirely unmoved. "It is safer there. I will join you shortly." Artem turned away, sighing. Data was, as always, right. He glanced back over his shoulder at the sight of the 4 Starfleet officers digging desperately through the rocky ruins.
Anij!
With both arms, Picard reached out, groping for her in the darkness, touching nothing but silt and rubble.
Worf to Picard.
Yes, I can hear you.
We're trying to get to you, sir.
Picard pushed himself from his side onto his knees. Outside of the bruises, he was in fair shape, yet the blow to his head had disoriented him somewhat. He had been running toward Anij, reaching for her, and she for him. As his eyes slowly adjusted, he sensed that a large slab of the ceiling had come down in one piece and wedged itself atop a large pile of rocks so that he had been protected from being crushed by it. So he continued his slow search. Had it not been for the dark purple of her robe, he might not have noticed her at all, so pale was her skin, as pale as the blonde curls that lay fanned about her head. Anij. In the dreadful silence that followed, her eyelids fluttered gently open for a heartbeat to look at him. By then, he had found his tricorder still on his belt and trained it on her with trembling hands. Massive internal bleeding. She was in shock and could die at any moment.
Anij, help is coming. Worf, you must hurry.
We can't risk using phasers, sir.
I understand. Tell Dr. Crusher to have a hypospray of lectrozine ready.
He heard Beverly Crusher's voice.
How bad is she, Captain?
I'm losing her, Doctor.
He pressed Anij's hand firmly to his cheek.
Stay with me. Don't let go this moment, Anij. Help me find the power to make you live in this moment.
Her eyelids fluttered to look on him once more before dying. How long that endless moment lasted, he could not say. But it was broken by a sharp intrusion of sunlight. Beverly Crusher suddenly appeared on Anij's other side and emptied a hypospray into the Baku woman's neck, then ran a tricorder over her. The doctor smiled over at Picard. She's stabilizing.
Is it safe to move her, Beverly?
Safer than leaving her in here. Picard lifted Anij into his arms and began to follow Crusher out of the collapsed cavern. On the way, Anij spoke weakly. And you thought it would take centuries to learn. The far end of the cavern, where Data had burned an escape exit into the calcite, was still standing, and Worf, Troy, Data, Crusher, accompanied by the captain and Anij, stepped out into the open air. Picard's sense of timelessness was replaced by urgent immediacy. Agleam with sunlight, 5 silver drones hovered, trembling like hummingbirds in the air, blocking the path to the mountain caverns. Abruptly, the drones gave birth, quicksilver hives spewing forth armies of tiny, barbed insects. Picard remained motionless, firing his phaser, determined to protect Anij as best he could. 1, 2 swift drones destroyed, the 3rd, and at last the 4th, leaving only 1. The last drone launched another shining swarm directed squarely at Picard and Anij. He looked down at Anij and to his horror saw the tiny metal tag protruding from her shoulder. Then he felt the sting in his own side and saw the barb sticking out of his jacket. He found himself staring into her startled eyes as the world around them began to glimmer, shift, and dissolve. Inside the massive brig of the sonar vessel, it was Sojev who greeted them first. Artem, do you know what has become of him, Captain? Anij answered from where she lay between the 2 men. Your son is well, Sojev. Data, the artificial life form, is taking excellent care of him now. And Jean-Luc himself saved him from great danger when the cave collapsed. Sojev did not lift his gaze from the wounded woman's face. Will you survive, Anij? Anij smiled at the Baku leader. I'll live. Suddenly aware that the background hum of a force field, as well as the gentle murmurs of Baku voices, had ceased, Picard followed the others' gazes toward the brig entry, where Subadar Gallatin escorted Dougherty into the brig. Dougherty looked down sternly at the trio on the floor. "Picard, order them to surrender, and I promise you won't be court-martialed."
Admiral, if court-martial is the only way to tell the people of the Federation what happened here, then I welcome it.
Suddenly, Ruafo came storming in, furred and feathered robes swinging.
"The Enterprise has destroyed one of my ships. The other is on fire, requesting assistance."
Picard looked up at the besieged Dougherty.
"The Enterprise would only fire if she were defending herself. Ruafo must have ordered an attack, and I can't believe he would have given that order without your consent, Admiral. I wonder which of us will be facing that court-martial."
The Admiral turned heavily away. "There's nothing further to be gained from this." The Adar turned to Picard.
"You're right. This is going to end now. The Baku want to stay on the planet. Let them. I'm going to launch the injector. In 6 hours, every living thing in this system will be dead or dying."
He turned again with a flourish of fur and feathers and strode toward the exit, sending Baku scurrying out of his way. Picard called softly after him.
"You would kill your own people, Ruafo? Your own parents? Your brothers, sisters?"
Picard noticed Dougherty's sharp astonishment.
"Didn't you know, Admiral? The Baku and the Sona are the same race."
Sojef rose and stepped forward to face Ruafo. "Picard just told us our DNA is the same. Which one were you? Golna? Roten? Belathnin?" Ruafo's eyes narrowed with contempt.
"Those names, those children are gone forever."
Dougherty stared at Sojef. "What are you talking about?" Sojef turned to him to explain. "A century ago, a group of our young people wanted to follow the ways of the Offlanders. They tried to take over the colony, and when they failed..." Ruafo interrupted.
"When we failed, you exiled us, to die slowly."
In Picard's arms, Anij stirred and raised her head. "You're Roten, aren't you?" She turned next to regard Gallatin, the Subadar. "Would you be his friend, Golna?" The officer looked away, clearly pained. "I helped your mother bathe you when you were a child. She still speaks of you." The Adar emitted a small hiss, then turned and left without further comment. Gallatin turned to follow, then paused, and cast a final, reluctant glance at Sojef before following the outraged Ruafo. Dougherty remained behind, a soul in tatters. "Picard, it was for the Federation. It was all for the Federation." Picard said nothing to Dougherty. It was up to the Admiral now to redeem himself, or remain in his own personal hell. He and the Baku watched as Dougherty turned and followed the same path Ruafo and Gallatin had taken out of the brig. For Matthew Dougherty, it was a very long walk through the spacious corridors of the Sona vessel. He had not lied to Picard, he told himself. He had done it for the Federation, for every sentient being who had suffered and died in the Federation, and that included Madeline. He still could not see so much the harm in relocating these people in order to grant the galaxy healing, youth, virtual immortality, but harming them was unconscionable. Would he have felt that way about relocating the Baku if he had first lived among them? The fact was, he knew that Ruafo had never intended to deal honestly with him, the Baku, or the Federation. Ruafo would never share the life-giving properties of the Baku planet with anyone but the Sona. Decisiveness, which had eluded him for just as long, returned. He knew precisely what he would say to Ruafo. He found himself standing at the entrance to the body sculpture chamber. Not a single Eloran attendant greeted him, and the individual treatment booths were dim and deserted, all but one, where Ruafo sat, eyes closed, face still creased with anger, a living, rotting corpse. Slowly, deliberately, the Admiral walked over to him. The Sona clearly heard, for his body tensed, but he kept his eyes closed.
Adar, we're taking this ship out of here. This mission is over.
Ruafo's eyes and mouth opened narrowly.
It is not over.
Dougherty turned to move away, to go to the bridge and give the commands that would take them out of the Briar Patch into communication range with Starfleet. But before he could do so, Ruafo rose, seized him by the shoulders, and with brute force moved him backwards.
I do not take orders from you.
Dougherty shouted back.
If you launch the injector while the planet is still populated, the Federation will pursue you until...
Oh! He broke off. Air pushed from his lungs as Ruafo slammed him down into one of the treatment chairs, then forced his head into a face-lifting device. In the split second before the Sona hit the controls, Matthew Dougherty realized that he was going to die. The device pulled his ears upward first, in the facelift procedure he had seen carried out on Ruafo so many times. And then there was pain, terrible pain, as the device pushed and pulled, first breaking his nose, and then crushing his jaw, and finally his skull with deafening crunches. And something very curious happened. Although his body struggled wildly, the Admiral's consciousness calmed at once, a disinterested spectator. This was certainly a horrible death, and yet the realization of what was happening to him brought with it a sense of relief and release. Death itself was an unutterably peaceful, freeing event. As for his body, his limbs had stopped their thrashing and now simply trembled. Whatever consciousness remained in his body dimmed, then darkened forever. And as he looked about himself, he realized it was no longer Ruafo who stood over him, hovering, but Madeline. Madeline, with her swinging silver hair and dimples, grinning down at him, saying, "See? Who says dying is such a terrible thing?" He reached up for her, smiling. On the Sona bridge, Gallatin sat in the Adar's chair overseeing a full complement of crew. Inside, Gallatin seethed. He had never meant it to come this far. He had only wanted to be a scientist, but he had had the misfortune to be born into a community that feared the very thing he loved. In his youth, he discovered a hidden treasure trove of cultural and scientific history in a cave, all on computer. For months, he secretly traveled to the cave and slowly unraveled the secrets of the computer and his forebears. His ancestors had called themselves the Kabu, and the pacifistic dissenters reversed the consonants to call themselves the Baku, which meant the peaceful. The Kabu had traveled the galaxy in sophisticated space vessels, relying on mechanization to do their labor for them. But the artist class had separated from the warrior class, and squabbling began. What was inherently evil about spaceships? Golna had asked Sojeff one day, and was frustrated by the calm reply. There is no evil in the vessels themselves, but in the attitude that spawns the vessels. The good aspect of technology helped to heal our ancestors, the bad, to destroy them. Here, the world itself heals us. We have the good. What need have we of the bad? Golna had 1,000 logical replies, but he kept silent. The Baku who had experienced the wars had been terrified for their lives. and that terror made them completely reject something that was neither bad nor good in itself, but neutral. So Golna observed his friends closely, discovered who in the village was curious, even interested in reviving the old technology and science. All of them were younger, second generation. Many agreed with Golna, especially Roten, a young farmer with an athlete's strength and grace. Golna's technological vision and genius impressed Roten deeply. He immediately befriended the young scientist and became the unofficial organizer of the Sona, the science movement. By then they had taken on new names, taken from Kabu historical records. They were Gallatin now, and Ruafo, and inseparable friends. In time, the Sona group grew so large that Ruafo and Gallatin went to Sojef and announced a takeover. The leader of the Baku countered that such a thing would be fair only if it represented a majority, and so the villagers were polled. The loss was crushing. Consensus of the loyal Baku doomed the Sona to exile, not from the village, but from the planet itself. Word had leaked out long ago that the Sona were in the process of constructing a spaceship out in the desert, a ship large enough to carry all 80 of them. "If you change your hearts, you are welcome to return," Sojef had said. Some months later, when the ship was at last completed, the Sona left. Far from easing, the hatred only increased over time. Their exile had doomed them to age and then die. At the first signs of decrepitude, they had taken extreme measures to reverse the aging process. Then, in his fury, Gallatin had designed the Collector, which guaranteed that the Baku would share in the misery of exile. The Baku would know, as he had, the pain of homesickness, would know, as he had, the horrors of aging. But he would not condemn them to die as they had him. He would show them that he was morally superior after all. The healing properties of their planet would be gathered and distributed freely throughout the Federation. Ruafo's suggestion that they simply activate the Collector and destroy everyone down on the planet's surface ate at Gallatin's soul. After 100 years, he had sat among them. His own aunt had offered him food and failed to recognize him. He had seen his mother playing with a young child in the distance. Might that be his brother? True, the Baku were wrong about technology, but Gallatin had been surprised by how very right they were about so much else. Ruafo entered the bridge, hands folded stiffly behind his back.
Admiral Dougherty will not be joining us for dinner.
A wave of nausea washed over Gallatin. The Admiral was no doubt dead, murdered by the Adar's own hands.
Deploy the Collector.
Gallatin looked at Ruafo.
May I talk with you alone?
With Ruafo in tow, Gallatin moved out of earshot of the others.
Moving them is one thing. Killing them all.
The Adar replied with perfect calm.
No one hated them more than you, Golna. We've come a long way together. This is the moment we've planned for so many years.
He laid a reassuring hand on Gallatin's shoulder.
Separate the Starfleet personnel and secure them in the aft cargo hold. See that Picard joins them.
Gallatin shook his head.
The shields in that section won't protect them against the thermolytic reaction.
Ruafo gave a small smile.
Thank you for reminding me.
Before the Collector could fully deploy, Gallatin turned and left. He knew the deployment stages all too well. Now he could not bear to see it in reality, but he saw it in his mind's eye, brilliant solar sails unfurling like a newborn butterfly's wings, expanding in front of the planet's rings, gleaming. So beautiful and so deadly. In the brig, Picard and the other Baku heard approaching footsteps outside. The force field ceased abruptly as Subadar Gallatin stood at the brig entry, plasma weapon aimed directly at the Starfleet captain. "Come with me." Picard knew that Ruafo was making good on his threat to destroy all those on the Baku planet. He knew that to both divert and test his second-in-command, the Adar had ordered Gallatin to execute him. The Sona could not risk Starfleet's interference, and if Matthew Dougherty was not already dead, he soon would be. As Picard kept a pace ahead of Gallatin, he cautiously spoke.
"It must have been strange for you when you were a hostage, surrounded by all the friends and families you knew so many years ago. All of them looking exactly as they did. Almost like looking through the eyes of childhood again. And here you are trying to close those eyes, trying not to see what the bitterness has done to your people."
The lift arrived. "Get in, Captain." Picard entered, turned to face the doors. Then he spat at Gallatin.
"A coward, without the moral courage to prevent an atrocity. You offend me."
Gallatin's eyes widened with incredulity.
"Is this how a Federation officer pleads for his life? I'm not pleading for my life, I'm pleading for yours. You can still go home, Golna."
Gallatin stepped inside the lift. The doors slid closed and he lowered his weapon.
What you're asking me to do, Picard, is impossible.
Picard wasted no time.
"Do you know how to disable the injector?"
The Sona's eyes flickered briefly.
I would need to be on the bridge. The crew is loyal to Ruafo.
Picard had not come this far, risked this much to fail. He flashed upon a memory. Rowing across the lake, climbing with Data into the holoship, and discovering a perfect holographic replica of the Baku village.
What if he doesn't realize something's happening? Can you get me to a transmitter? I have to speak with Worf and Data on the surface. We'll need their help.
Gallatin spoke to the lift computer.
Deck 12.
To Picard, he gave a slow, single nod. On the Sonar bridge, Ruafo watched the view screen as the collector glided, majestic as an airborne raptor, toward its intended prey. With solar sails spread wide, the collector was elegant in design, as beautiful as the justice it was about to dispense. Gallatin had always been as much artist as scientist, though in his heart he had never broken fully with the Baku. Even so, Ruafo loved Gallatin as a brother and stood in awe of his talents. But now the time had come for Gallatin to face the truth, that Ruafo had never intended to share the metaphasic radiation with the Federation. The Federation people disgusted him, all their highly touted technology, and still they had not conquered old age and death. Sheep waiting to die. Every one of those Baku elders who now sat in the Sonar brig would be told of the total destruction of their world, their remaining loved ones, before they were put to death. It was only fair. Ruafo gave an ensign the order.
Initiate separation protocols.
Ruafo glanced at the chronometer at his station and saw the countdown begin. A seasoned Sonar lieutenant scowled down at his monitor.
A small craft is coming up from the surface. It's powering up its weapons.
The glorious scene of the sailing collector vanished and was replaced by an annoying sight. A tiny Federation vessel, the one Picard had taken down to the planet's surface.
One person aboard. It's the android.
Ruafo waved a dismissive hand.
He's no threat.
At that moment, the ship shuddered slightly from the weak attack. In the narrow passageway filled with electrical conduits and circuitry, Picard crawled behind Gallatin.
Data to Picard. Sir, they're ignoring my attack.
Keep firing tachyon bursts into their shield grid. Is Worf in position?
Yes, sir. He's ready for simultaneous transport.
Gallatin turned back and signaled over his shoulder for silence.
Data, we're approaching the bridge now. Picard out.
He drew in a breath and prayed that he had read Gallatin correctly, and he was not about to be betrayed. The Aloran technician on the sonar bridge turned to Ruafo.
Separation in 1 minute.
Ruafo stared at the collector sailing regally toward its destination. The time would come when Gallatin would thank him. The sonar lieutenant turned to Ruafo.
Sir, the Federation ship is creating a disruption in our shields. If the shields go out of phase, it will increase our exposure to the thermolytic reaction.
Ruafo withdrew from his reverie, irritated.
Very well. Destroy that ship and reset our shield harmonics. Do not delay the countdown.
In the cockpit aboard the captain's yacht, Data sat calmly as a nova brilliant blast of plasma sent the small ship spinning out of control. He knew at that instant his most important function was to inform Picard of his success. Data to Picard. They are rotating the shield harmonics. I am attempting to return to the surface. On the sonar bridge, the Aloran ensign informed Ruafo.
The Federation ship has been disabled. Separation in 20 seconds.
Ruafo felt a thrill that left gooseflesh on the worn, tired skin of his arms. The horror and indignity of death and aging receded. He was so close, as if he were already reborn. A sudden shimmer, a flash. Ruafo blinked as his vision blurred, then cleared again.
What was that?
The sonar lieutenant checked his monitor and shook his head.
I don't know. Systems don't seem affected. Separation in 10 seconds. 5 seconds.
At last, the collector drew close to the planet's shimmering rainbow rings and glided to a halt. A small elliptical object emerged from its center and hurtled toward one of the rings, pierced it, and dispersed a series of charges, white-hot novas within the rainbows that made Ruafo wince with pain. When the after-image cleared, he saw a sight that left him on the edge of tears. Within a second, no more, the first ring had dissolved and the next had begun. On the planet's surface, the radiation levels would be rising, and the people would just now be starting to die. A sonar ensign turned to Ruafo in confusion.
Sir, I'm not showing any change in metaphasic flux levels. All ship functions are offline.
Ruafo went immediately to the nearest station and checked the readouts for himself.
How can there be no ship functions if the view screen is working?
Ruafo broke off as something in the periphery of his vision caught his eye. Above an unmanned console sat a small steel-gray tile that contrasted with the surrounding bulkhead. There was something horrifyingly familiar about that tile. Ruafo had seen many such tiles when Gallatin had shown him the interior of the holoship that would take the Baku from their homeworld. Ruafo reached out and touched the tile above the console. He withdrew his fingers as if scalded.
A hollow deck?
To the horror of the others, he pulled a disruptor from his belt and fired at the wall. The familiar sight of his bridge dissolved.
A hollow deck?
His stunned officers watched as he fired and revealed more of the familiar gray grid. Ruafo flashed suddenly on his last encounter with Gallatin, on the uncertainty in his friend's voice and eyes. He had been too focused on what was to come to truly register Gallatin's unease. He remembered putting an encouraging hand on the Subadar's shoulder, giving him the order to escort Picard. and he had expected, with good reason, for Gallatin to comply. As long as Gallatin himself was not required to kill directly, he had always done as Ruafo ordered. Oh, he might protest from time to time, but in the end, he always obeyed. It was easier for him to let someone else make the decision, someone else take the blame. That bastard Picard. Somehow, during that short walk, he had turned Gallatin against the Sona. Golna, how could you betray me on the eve of our victory? Ruafo continued firing until the hologrid gave way to a short flight of upward-leading stairs. He dashed up them while the others followed. Immediately, he stopped short. This was Gallatin's holoship bridge, no more than a cockpit with a huge view screen that revealed a heart-wrenching sight. The Baku planet nestled inside its glowing, perfectly intact rings. And nearby, the metaphasic radiation collector stalled and impotent, its injector assembly unlaunched. Ruafo turned to his officers.
We were transported to the holoship when we reset our shields. Everything we saw was an illusion. Computer, Ruafo, authorization Delta 2-1. Override all interleak commands to injector assembly.
Unable to comply. Injector assembly 1 has been deactivated.
Aboard the real Sona bridge, Picard and Gallatin waited for Worf to look up from his console.
All injector subsystems are confirmed offline.
Picard and Gallatin smiled faintly at each other.
Decloak the holoship and engage a tractor beam, Mr. Worf.
Right about now, Picard decided, Ruafo and crew were realizing that their own attempt at deceit had been used against them. He turned to Gallatin.
Golna, open a channel to Commander Data.
The Sona did so with uncanny speed. Picard could hear a terrible shrieking of metal.
Data, what's your status?
Precarious, sir. I'm having trouble re-entering the atmosphere.
Understood, Data. Well done.
Picard severed the connection. Smiling, Picard turned to Gallatin, only to find the Sona's expression darkening.
What is it, Gallatin? What's wrong?
The Subadar lifted his somber face toward the view screen, where his holoship creation, entrapped by the tractor beam, orbited alongside the much larger Sona vessel.
Don't say well done quite yet, Captain. It isn't over.
Picard drew back.
Is there something we've forgotten? Some way Ruafo could...
Gallatin shook his head.
He's secure. There's no way he can beam here from the holoship. But I know him. This will only make him more determined than ever to fight to succeed. If there is a way to escape and ignite the rings, Ruafo will find it.
Ruafo forced himself to look away from the too painful sight of the stalled collector. Instead, he stared at the single basic console. The solution to his frustration lay somewhere in these controls. Gallatin may have been the technological genius, but Ruafo was a brilliant strategist with the talent for finding answers where there were none. When Gallatin had showed him the collector's interior, climbing the rungs upward, Ruafo had followed, wheezing, old bones complaining. Ruafo had asked him,
What safeguards are you planning on putting in place to ensure detonation, in case there are problems with the launch?
Days later, Gallatin had come to him and explained that he was going to equip the collector's interior with life support and its own internal control console in case of an emergency.
If need be, I could beam over and make any adjustment.
He proceeded to explain to Ruafo how even the injector assembly would have its own control panel, which would have its own cockpit, and of course the special anti-metaphasic shields. Ruafo had told him to leave the control panel as it was and put a force field around it. Then they would send an Aloran or a Tarlac, who would survive long enough to perform a simple task. Ruafo gave a grim inward smile.
Thanks to you, Gallatin, I will not fail.
He turned to the Tarlac ensign.
This ship is equipped with 14 long-range transporters. Are they all useless?
The officer rapidly worked the console.
They must have been locked and secured after we were beamed here.
Ruafo paused no more than an instant.
Isolate one and reroute its command sequence through the auxiliary processor.
Behind him, the sonar lieutenant protested.
Sir, there's nothing we can do. They already have control of the main ship.
Ruafo turned and held the lieutenant with a pointed look.
I don't plan on going back to our ship.
Aboard the partially repaired bridge of the Enterprise, Will Riker sat at command, stroking his smooth chin and staring at the view screen with its colorful display of swirling debris and gases. They had entered the Briar Patch hours earlier, for Riker a nearly unbearable stretch of time since communications with the away team had been impossible. If the Sona had been so willing to destroy the Enterprise and all aboard her, what was to keep them from slaughtering those on the Baku planet's surface? The thought had plagued him from the moment the Enterprise escaped her pursuers, especially in terms of Deanna. Certainly he was deeply concerned about the captain and crew, but the thoughts that kept him from sleep, that permeated his waking hours, were of Deanna. The fact was that he was as deeply in love with her as he had ever been. He'd been certain those feelings were simply part of the Briar Patch's rejuvenation effect, the stirring up of the hormones of youth. But once the ship was clear of the patch, the intensity of his feelings did not alter. In truth, by the time he informed Starfleet Command of the real situation between the Baku and the Sona, his love and concern for her had increased, not faded as he had expected. Nor was this the wild, immature infatuation of youth. When he first had met her, he had fallen in love with an image of her, a projection of what he had secretly desired, what he had thought the perfect woman should be, someone who wanted exactly what he wanted, someone whose thoughts were identical to his, someone who always understood everything he said exactly the way he'd intended it. And it was the discrepancy between that image and Deanna herself that had caused much of their conflict. Now, he wanted only the woman herself, with all her quirks, imperfections, beauty, and strength. He wanted to be a part of her life, experience her, learn from her, and he wanted it this time to last. But if he had lost her now, his reverie was interrupted by Lieutenant Daniels, who called from Tactical.
Commander, we're within sensor range of the Sona ship. I'm picking up Captain Picard's biosignature.
Riker swiveled in his chair to stare at Daniels with a mixture of surprise and relief. Picard was alive.
Enterprise to Picard.
On the Sona bridge, Picard smiled with delight.
Captain, we should be at your position within an hour. Do you need assistance?
Negative, number one. Did you succeed?
Yes, sir. Council has ordered a halt to the Baku relocation while they conduct a top-level review.
Worf interrupted and gestured at the chronometer display. Impossibly, it was counting down again. At once, Gallatin bent over the console he was sitting at and furiously worked the controls.
The separation protocols have been reset on board the collector. I can't override.
Picard glanced at Worf.
Scan the collector for life signs.
The Klingon complied.
1. It's Ruafo. Can you beam him off? Negative, sir. He's raised shields.
Picard turned to Gallatin.
Is there any other way to disable the injector?
Perhaps.
Gallatin motioned them toward the display on his monitor. He zoomed in on the section called the injector assembly, the part Ruafo was now attempting to relaunch.
If we could get onto the collector, we could remove the ignition matrix directly from the injector assembly.
The Subadar pointed a gnarled finger at a half-meter square panel of circuitry connected to a larger conduit. Worf checked his readouts.
Sir, there's a small opening in the shields at the base of the coupling adapter. I might be able to beam through it. Remain at your post, Commander.
Picard strode over to the transporter.
Gallatin, the ignition sequence. What can you tell me?
The thrusters activate 1 minute before separation. You'll see the cryogenic tanks venting. Don't use any laser tools or weapons after that. They could ignite the propellant exhaust. The substructure will retract 15 seconds prior to separation.
Picard listened, nodding, as he strapped a phaser rifle to his chest. The captain watched as the Klingon and Gallatin, now both gazing at him with concern and hope, blurred out of focus and dissolved. And in place of the transporter pad beneath his feet, Picard found himself standing on a platform near the base of the sail support structure, some 100 meters above the base of the collector itself. Far above and to his left was the several decks high injector assembly. To his left on the collector floor stood Roafo, with his back to both Picard and the injector. The Adar worked busily at a control panel.
Separation in 2 minutes.
Picard caught hold of a metal railing and began to climb. Beneath him, he heard the computer warn of an intruder. Roafo knew now that he was here, but he kept climbing, counting the seconds. Picard clung to the railing and glanced down and to his left some 40 meters, where a burst of plasma ricocheted off a conduit to the deck below. At the control panel, Roafo lowered a small handheld weapon. When he met Ruafo's gaze dead on, he understood. The collector was Ruafo's one chance at justice for his people, and harming it was unthinkable. Weapon in hand, Ruafo rushed over to the edge of the support structure and swung himself up on the nearest rung in pursuit. Within less than a minute, Picard would be within the plasma weapon's range. The captain drew a breath and pulled himself up. Faster, faster. Picard climbed and counted seconds. The injector assembly became gradually closer until it stood less than a handful of meters away. Behind him, Ruafo was moving faster than an aging Sona ought. He was gaining. Picard realized he would never make it to the injector assembly in time without being shot. Reluctantly, Picard seized his rifle and fired. Ruafo recoiled, allowing Picard to scramble the last few meters and pull himself up onto the catwalk that led to the injector. The cryogenic tanks began to vent. Thrusters activated.
1 minute to separation.
The captain never slowed, never looked back. The anticipated plasma blast never came. Ruafo was not willing to destroy himself and his dream for the sake of killing Picard. The captain ducked and held his breath as he ran past a stream of gas from the venting tanks. At last, he arrived at the front of the vast injector assembly. He clutched the ignition matrix in both hands, preparing to pull it from the bulkhead with all his strength.
Stop!
Picard turned. The Sona, red-faced and breathless, stood on the catwalk not 3 meters distant, plasma gun trained directly on him. Between them, gas vapors roiled in the air.
We're getting too old for this, Ruafo.
The Sona glared at him with unalloyed hate.
After today, that won't be a problem for either of us.
Separation in 30 seconds.
Just step off the injector, Picard.
Picard eyed him in disbelief. If Ruafo fired through the gas, he would just as likely destroy the Matrix as kill Picard.
Are you really going to risk igniting the fumes?
Their gazes locked. Ruafo seethed. The captain's lips spread in a slow grin.
No. All right. Then I will.
And Picard lifted his rifle. Picard directed a single shot at the swirling gas some 2 meters above their heads. Then Picard dove behind the control console and closed his eyes. For a blazing millisecond, it was like staring wide-eyed at a daytime sun. Then the brightness dimmed, and he peered up above the console to see the Adar on his back on the catwalk, hood thrown back to reveal the stretched, bruised flesh stapled to the back of his skull. Picard seized the ignition matrix and, with pure exhilaration, tore it from the wall. At once, he scrabbled downward with his prize, crawling to a plank that led him on a lower level back in the sonar's direction. And he smiled to himself as he heard Ruafo's steps above him, hurrying through the now dissipating smoke to the injector assembly where the captain had stood only seconds before. By the time Picard climbed back up onto the catwalk where Ruafo had just stood, the sonar was lifting his hand to the empty spot on the circuit board in a slow gesture of disbelief and loss. Picard raised the ignition matrix. "Looking for this." Ruafo whirled about to face him. His eyes were bright and terrible. But then the brightness dimmed. Rage was replaced by fear, hatred by grief. These were the eyes of a man confronting his death and the defeat of his only dream. The platform beneath Picard's feet shuddered slightly, then began to retract from the injector assembly in preparation for launch. In 10 seconds, Ruafo would be launched unprotected, along with the disarmed injector into the vacuum of space. It would be a swift death, but hardly a pleasant one in the freezing, airless void. Picard set the matrix down, hurried to the very edge of the retracting catwalk, and reached out. "Take my arm." Already the gap between them was almost too wide. Ruafo hesitated as fear warred with hatred. In the end, panic won, and he stretched forth a mottled, bejeweled hand toward Picard's, his eyes wild and shining with tears. Yet their hands never met, but remained inches apart, unreachably close. The plank beneath Picard's feet vibrated, forcing him to clutch the railing with both hands to keep from falling into the chasm. The injector separated entirely from the main structure with surprising speed, sealing Picard safely inside behind an observation window. He expected to see Ruafo's body hurtling past, freed from life and the constraints of gravity. But that grisly sight never came. At last, he redirected his gaze at the injector, sailing harmlessly toward the Baku planet's colorful rings, and was astonished to see Ruafo, still alive beneath a force field at the injector control panel. Clutching the console, Ruafo sailed aboard the injector into the magnificence of the planetary rings. Light and spectral color brilliant beyond torment bathed him, consumed him until he was no longer an entity separate from it, but radiant himself from every cell. Instinct closed his eyes. Still, color and light pierced him, then went utterly, irrevocably black. Ruafo realized that the metaphasic radiation had blinded him. Suddenly dizzied, he sank to his knees, hand still clutching the console's edge, a penitent kneeling at the altar. Yet in the midst of dying, he felt a sudden surge of life and put trembling fingers to his face. The top layer of skin sloughed off from their tips at once. He felt his cheeks become firmer, more supple. He was growing younger, so swiftly that in the space of 2 seconds, no more, his features and skin shifted as if molten, forming and reforming to middle age, young adulthood, youth. Death was a crucible burning away the years. The experience became pure and immediate, untainted by the past. Timeless. Pain, as cells disintegrated, leaving blood vessels and organs to bleed. Growing younger, smaller, he lost his grip on the console's edge and instead leaned, gasping against its side. At the same time, he felt an emotional detachment from the agonizing struggle. It was as though he were a compassionate stranger looking upon this suffering child, and he felt pity, not because the child would die, but because the child's life had been a wasted one, wasted in running from death, in fearing it, fighting it, when death meant no more than yielding to the gentle void. And yield at last he did, letting himself fall, body, mind, and soul, into the darkness, into the silence into a place far younger than he had ever known. In the village square, Riker squinted against the bright sun as he watched the Baku, children and animals in tow, make their way down from the mountains. When he saw Deanna, he waved excitedly, as if he and she had been separated years rather than days. No point in trying to hide his feelings from Worf. He asked the Klingon, "You think when we get away from this metaphasic radiation, it'll change the way we feel?" Worf replied with uncharacteristic gentleness,
"Your feelings about her haven't changed since the day I met you, Commander. This place just let them out for a little fresh air."
Awkward in his fine robes, Gallatin stood upon the soft grass on the outskirts of the village square as the Baku returned home. He felt almost shamefully relieved. But as he watched young bodies burrowing into haystacks, he grieved for the loss of his childhood friend, Roten. Loyal and straightforward, and keenly interested in everything Golna had to say. Gallatin felt drawn to remain here. This was his home. But how could he live among the Baku? How could he be himself after all that had happened? As Sojef and Picard strolled through the village outskirts with Anij between them, the Baku leader referred to the unawares Gallatin. "I wish there were a way to bring them back home. There's so much bitterness on both sides." As he spoke, Picard noticed Beverly Crusher escorting a beautiful young Baku woman toward the fields. The young Baku's face stared intently at the preoccupied Gallatin. She was trying to recognize him. Gallatin turned, his stunned expression now in profile. He immediately knew her. She cried out, raised her hand to her lips, then stood on tiptoe to throw her arms about him. For a tense instant, Gallatin stood, stiff and motionless, then slowly, gently returned the embrace and leaned his head upon her shoulder. Picard shared a knowing look with Crusher. Anij was studying the captain with an expression of dawning realization. "Mother and son, you arranged this?"
"I thought it might begin the healing process."
Sojef considered Picard's statement in silence, then reached forth and shook the captain's hand with an expression of such deep appreciation that Picard felt overly compensated. Without a further word, Sojef strode away, directly toward Gallatin and his mother. At the same instant, Worf approached with a sense of urgency.
"Captain, the Ticonderoga has moved into orbit."
That said, he turned and walked far enough away to grant Picard some privacy. Anij looked at him with pale eyes, and he saw his own pain at leaving reflected there. "Captain, what am I going to do without you?"
"I wish I could stay, but these are perilous times for the Federation. I have to go back, if only to slow things down at the Federation Council."
She nodded, stroking his arm to comfort him.
"But I have 318 days of vacation time coming, and I intend to use them."
He took her into his arms and kissed her, allowing himself to slip again into timelessness. Artem heard an unfamiliar voice from far away calling Data, and Artem popped his head up through the straw. Not an instant later, Data's head poked through the straw beside him. Artem saw the group of Starfleet officers waiting for Data in the meadow and felt a surge of sorrow. His new companion had finally mastered the concept of hide and seek and was turning into an amazing playmate. Firmly squelching any impulse toward tears, Artem crawled from the hay and brushed straw from his hair, arms, and legs. Data did the same. "I have to go now, Artem." Artem looked down at his feet and nodded. "Bye." The android said goodbye, turned, and began to walk away. Artem moved over to his father, who had just returned from speaking with the one called Golna. To the boy's surprise and delight, Sojev looked at the android and smiled. "Mr. Data, I hope we'll see you again." Data acknowledged with a pleasant nod. Artem called out, "Data, don't forget. You've got to have a little fun every day." The one called Commander Riker nodded. Good advice. He offered his hand to the dark-haired, elegant Troy, who took the proffered hand firmly and smiled up at Riker with a look that made Artem squirm. It was the same look the boy had seen exchanged between adults in love. And although Father said that in only a few years Artem's attitude would change, at the moment he found the phenomenon disgusting. He looked away toward Captain Picard, who left Anisia's side to stand with his officers.
Picard to Enterprise. 7 to beam up. Energize.
For Anij, the moment before Jean-Luc disappeared in the transporter glow was timeless, as was the memory of him she had impressed on her heart. It would hurt Sojev to lose her, but he had never had her love to begin with. He had seen her with Picard, and perhaps already knew that she could never wed him now, because her heart belonged to an Offlander who was now gone for an indefinite period of time. But it mattered not how long he was gone. Anij knew that he would return, for what they had shared had been timeless. Always. Forever.
Star Trek IX, Insurrection, was written by J.M. Dillard and read by Boyd Gaines. It was adapted for audio by George Truitt. The recording engineer was Paul Fowley. Editing by Common Mode. Paul Fowley, Technical Director. Sound design and post-production by Gary Fink. Original music was composed by Sam McCallie, Carl Schurtz, and Richard Emmett. The associate producer was Florence Barreau Adams. Star Trek IX, Insurrection, was produced and directed by Susan Perrin. This has been a presentation of Simon & Schuster Audio.